Hello, I'm Jason Cabinets. Here at Cabinets HR, we'll launch a crowdfunding campaign on the Refunder platform starting June 1st. For more info, go to www.refunder.com/cabinetshr. Our guest today is Terri Gilbert. Terri, you ready to be great today?
Oh, yes.
Terri, what do you do for either for fun or for your hobbies?
Oh, wow. That's like,
Softball
it's a softball question. Exactly.
Yes.
So I'm a science communicator, I guess, right? You know, I do my own consulting, and mostly I do that so that I can do stuff that I love to do intellectually, and then have time for all the other things that I like to do. I love to garden. I have chickens and a lot of animals. I love to cycle. I love to camp. I read I read a lot. So I figure we can talk about a lot of that stuff, right? But you know, I'm on a unique kind of spiritual journey, so I like to do some literally shamanic journeying. That's another thing that I do in my I don't know, one of the things I love to do. It's a hobby, I guess you could call it. You know, but you know what I do for my business is I help people talk about complex things.
So raising chickens and gardening, is that for fun? Do you actually raise it for food, or do you have like one of those yards like 25 chickens and garden it?
No, we've only got 5 chickens now, and that was definitely a pandemic project. You know, it's amazing how meditative chickens are. Shocking. You know, it was like, you know, during all of the stress about that, I would go and sit in my backyard and my chickens would roost on me, and there was nothing that could mess with me mentally when that was happening. So
you live like in the rural area, or?
No, I live in West Seattle.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah. So
I'm guessing y'all don't have a homeowner association?
No, exactly. Right. You know, so yeah, it's just, you know, it's kind of suburban, you know, in Seattle. It's you know, it's right on a bus line, but you know, it was one of those, you know, we wanted to find a place big enough for the whole family. I've got 3 kids and my mom lives with us. And so to find something big enough like that, you kind of had to move out of the city. It's still in the city limits, but you know,
yeah,
my kids complained because they said it was out of Seattle.
So how many, I mean, just want to know, like, how many eggs do chicken lay a day? Is it like same number every day, or varies?
Yeah, it's well, we've got 2 bantams, and they're good for like 2 to 3 a week, except when they're broody, right? And they're, you know, they're the little chickens, and they lay cute little eggs. And then we've got 3 regular sized chickens, and they lay 1 a day. Okay. And on the long days, right? So they actually stop laying. I don't keep a light on so that they lay all through the year. Yeah. So it's,
I'm guessing y'all eat the eggs, right?
Yeah.
I have to imagine like there's like a real big difference in taste as far as like a 1-day egg out of the chicken versus store-bought, right?
Absolutely. It's huge. You know, my kids, when they go visit, you know, my daughter's job is to house sit. And so when she's hanging out at other people's houses and they still have eggs, she's like, it's just not the same. Right. So they steal as many eggs as they can.
Yeah. So you're going to keep the chickens for a while?
Yeah. You know, I love having them around, and they get along pretty well with the dog, and, you know, the cat's the same size. Yeah. Well, the last dog we had, you know, they definitely thought of them as food. So we had to fence them apart. But now the big chickens, they come into the big yard because the grass is greener.
So when you take an egg from a chicken, do you like try to stop you or anything? Because you're basically like taking the chow from them, or is this?
They're, you know, some people apparently have really aggressive chickens, and I don't, right? You know, I pick up my chickens, and one of them doesn't like me to pet them, but I pet the other ones, and the little ones are broody right now. So they scream. They scream when I take them off the eggs, right? And it's not really screaming. It's actually cute little cooing noises, but yeah.
So there's one thing you didn't say, and I asked that question, like, what do you do for fun? You're the first one who didn't say hiking. Everyone else says hiking.
That's funny, because I walk every day. Yeah. So, you know, even we've got the Duwamish Greenbelt, and I've even taken the dog into areas I shouldn't have gone. She's a white Siberian Husky, and she came back completely brown, and I came back with mud up to my thighs. So I of course I like hiking, right? Yeah.
So, we just Seattle, right?
I know, right? It's like it's like that's just like the normal thing, right? You know, you buy groceries, you go hiking.
So, what does it mean to be a scientist?
I think basically if you're curious about something and then take a systematic view to try and understand what it is, right? And so there's the scientific method, develop a hypothesis, do experiments, do that whole thing. But I think I encourage kids to like just explore their curiosity, like to keep asking the question why. And so I have a pedigree, but I'm not, I'm not married to it. And I don't think people need to have I went to school forever and ever because I never wanted to leave. But, and I watched people, hang out in college because they were supposed to, and they hated it. And I was like, that you don't have to do that. You could do something without a college degree. And then of course my kids have got their own stories. My daughter never went to college. She's thinking about going back now because she keeps getting told that it would be better for her if she went to college, but she's not really sure what she wants to go for. And then I had 2 kids in college at the beginning of the pandemic, and then no kids in college at the end of the pandemic. So, because that was just, the pandemic was hard. So
as a scientist, what responsibility does scientists have to the general public?
I think that scientists need to know how to communicate, because it's not just for knowledge sake, although some people, that's why they do it. It's like I've had people who they would perform an experiment and then they would just revel in that they knew something that nobody else in the world knew, like just like that part, which is fine. It's an intellectual pursuit. It's one of those things that gives you pleasure. But I think scientists need to be able to talk about what they do and the relevance of what they do. And by relevance, I don't mean, is this going to make me money, right? I'm not at all out of that kind of relevance, but like being able to explain to people why they're doing what they're doing, right? And like being able to do the big picture. And not a lot of scientists are good at doing that, which is one of the reasons why I went into science communication, because it wasn't important to me what science I was doing, but I loved being able to talk about science and what it provides for people and how they can apply it in their own life, things like that. So I think being able to communicate, right? And then also to, there's a whole world about like the funding structure that we have now, and scientists who go into academia and being able to get tenure, which is the holy grail, right? You get tenure and you can never be fired, although it's not really the case, but that when they start doing whatever they can to forward themselves, like forward their power or forward their empire or forward, what people people think of them, right? I think that when you start, what's the best way to say this? When you have a lack of integrity. No worries. I put my phone on do not disturb for that one.
Yeah, my phone is on do not disturb.
Oh yeah, if there's people on your list that are emergencies.
Well, this is a bank.
A bank?
Yeah, that's why I don't know how it's making it through.
Wow. Scammers are getting good these days, aren't they?
Yeah. So off the subject, so I'll come back to what you're saying first. Yeah. So Paul sent me a message, right? Hey, I'm changing my number, right? Just so you know. Okay, no problem. 3 days later, I got a number from her area code. Oh, it must be my daughter from a no number. It was like a scammer. It might be a coincidence, like, man, like you're good. Like, exactly. you're good. You're good.
Yeah, it's amazing the things that come up on my phone after I've just been talking about it. So there's forwarding your position is really not, I don't know. I guess, human scientists are human beings, right? And there's always jerks, human beings, like there's a whole range, right, of experience, right? And so, doing something like having a lack of integrity and forwarding yourself, I don't think that should happen, right? Doing science to forward your company's product, or even doing science to forward your own idea, right? That was one of the things that I got really disillusioned by at one point. One of the things I got, disillusioned by was, I became a scientist because I wanted to find the truth, right? And then I realized you're not finding the truth; you're just finding stuff out. And I was, one of the things that got me really upset was that people really don't care about evidence, right? That whole thing. And I was like, well, what's the point of having evidence if people don't care about it? And then the other one was that when you found the result to an experiment, right? You've got the result, and then people do what people always do, is they interpret it, right? And I watched the exact same result get interpreted in two completely different opposing ideas, and I was like, wow, there's no
anything
truth.
to support their own personal bias.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't do it on purpose, right? That's the whole unconscious bias thing. But to forward your ideas, and that's some people are just smart enough to be dangerous with.
Yeah, I know one criticism of a lot of people, scientists during the pandemic, like a lot of them had this, like, came across so arrogant, like, I'm the scientist, don't question what I'm doing, I know better than you, like.
Yeah.
And first of all, like, it kills me when people say don't question science, right? You're supposed to question science, right?
Right.
Isn't that the background of science? Question science?
Yes, it's question the science, absolutely, right? And I think there is like being intelligent, right?
I mean, I know you're smart,
course, right?
Hopefully you're smarter than most of us, right?
Well,
at least in your discipline anyway.
Yeah, but there's so much nuance, right? Like there's so much nuance in stuff, right? And I was studying a particular receptor, and I was mutating that receptor so that we could understand what that receptor was doing when it was in that conformation, right? It was like there's so much nuance into it, in all of it, and element of if there is nuance, right? And I think that's part of the reason why some scientists aren't getting science, because such nuance that you don't want to go into the weeds, because then people just go to sleep, right? But you want to be able to at least communicate it in such a way that lay people can understand it, right? And then when things get politicized, you're like, that's just BS, right? Because if you want to talk about the nuance, right? I'd have a lot of moms talk to me about vaccination, because that's like, it's the immune system, right? That was the first class I ever took where I thought I aced it, and I got like 60% on it. I was shocked, right? And then I was, because I loved learning, I was like, okay, let's go into this more, because clearly I thought I understood something when I didn't, right? And the immune system is like that. So, that's, and so there's, question the science, but, don't have it be an accusation when you, like, I think that's where people start getting, like, when you have to defend something, we don't want to defend anything. We really do want to, like, ask all of the different questions, and people would come back with, well, there's these results that are, there's these things that we're seeing, like with the COVID vaccine. That was fascinating as a scientist to watch all of that happen, because, the COVID vaccine is the most studied vaccine ever, right? We had so many people that were
worldwide, right?
Right, worldwide, like millions of people were taking the vaccine. Nobody gets that kind of a trial. Right? And and it's also, when you're doing a vaccine trial, it's almost, if it's like a life-saving thing, it's almost unethical not to give the vaccine, right? Like for placebo trials, like we're just going to give you protein, right? We're just going to give you the protein as opposed to giving you the vaccine, right? But with COVID, it was awesome. We had plenty of people who didn't want to take the vaccine, so we had lots of controls. It was awesome, right? So scientists can also get morbid, right?
Yeah, I know what scientists, like, I think maybe even more transparent, right? Like, I mean, this might be an example, but I remember Dr. Fauci, I think that's how you say his name.
Yeah.
He remember he said, wear masks.
Yeah.
But the real reason, because they needed that, hey, don't wear a mask, if people really need it. I think everyone was okay, cool, we got it.
Yeah.
And when you get some mess work, but he just put, and then I think his credibility just was destroyed after that.
Well, things got taken out of context too, right? There was a lot of things where, it's just the half of what was said, right? Or like maybe the whole conversation was about, look, we don't have any PPE for the medical, and we don't really need it for us. And it turns out that the cloth masks didn't work that well anyway, but it was better than nothing at the time, right? So yeah, it was scary. You remember, I forget about how scary it was when
I know when I first started, like we seen all the images of Italy like getting destroyed, like, oh shit, that's coming here, like what we got to do,
Right.
I mean, it was scary stuff. And as far as pandemics go, I think we got off pretty good, right? I mean, that's based on stats, Of course, people die, that's a bad thing, but based on stats, like we're nowhere near like the Black Plague of the mid 1500s and nothing like that, or the Spanish flu.
Well, there's the whole thing about long COVID too, that a lot of people aren't taking into account. And, we still don't fully understand it. And there's a lot of things, there's a lot of symptoms of long COVID that look like things like fibromyalgia and medical conditions that people were just ignored about, because it's like, it's bad. It's bad enough to have a huge impact on the quality of life, but you're not dead. Right. And so there's a lot of people that are disabled now, like their quality of life is much lower because of long COVID, right? They can't breathe, they're exhausted, right? It's kind of invisible illnesses, right? And so, people sometimes wonder, it doesn't, in a lot of cases, people don't give them the benefit of the doubt, right? And so, and I do think it's going to be a major, major problem in the coming decades. So
do you think COVID is pretty much like the flu now? Like the flu, you don't get COVID every year. You have to get your COVID shot with the flu shot every year.
Well, yeah, I think it's endemic, right? It's always going to be around. It's clearly, there's even in Seattle, right? There's not a whole lot of people wearing masks. My daughter still wears a mask everywhere she goes, and I wear a mask while I'm traveling. And part of the reason I do that is not because it's not because traveling is particularly dangerous. It's just that every time that I've gotten sick while I was traveling, it was because somebody sneezed on me or coughed on me, right? And then when you're traveling, you're going someplace for a purpose, so you got to be well. And I was like, wow, the masks for traveling, this is awesome. We should have been doing this for years, right? Because that was one of the worst times of when I would get sick, just with the flu while I was traveling. So always while I'm traveling now, I wear a mask.
One thing talking about policy, COVID I thought was funny, like people might not realize this, but the COVID was actually done underneath President Trump, right? But then he left office, Biden came in, and all the Republicans, I won't say all the Republicans, but most people are like, I don't trust this. But your guy did it. Well, I know my guy did it, but now President Biden's doing it, and we don't trust him. Like the vaccine hasn't changed while delivering something, right?
Right.
I mean, the mental gymnastics people are doing on both sides of the political spectrum, just insane.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it? So that's one of the things that I do. So I'm a board member for a nonprofit called Love Is My Religion, and all we do with this is we hold events, right? We hold, they're called Be Heard roundtables. And what we do is we bring people across the political spectrum, far right, left, Republicans, conservatives, libertarians, whatever you call it, socialists. We bring them all into a room, and we have a conversation over a hot topic, right? Like abortion or guns or policing or racism, LGBTQ. And then we just, the whole purpose is not to change people's minds. The purpose is just to train ourselves to be in a conversation with somebody that we disagree with. And, we had one on climate. We just had one on climate change and on labels, and our next one's going to be about drugs, but it really, right. And because we tell them this, the whole point of this event is for you to listen. And so, and because we found that when people have the experience of being heard, right, they can let go of, that people like hang on so tight to their opinions that they can start to relax, right? And then, and people are often shocked at the ends of the calls because we went online entirely over during COVID, like everybody. And it turns out that it really works in a virtual environment to do this kind of conversation. And we can have people from all over the world come in. But people are usually shocked at, how to, the things that they have in common with other people, and just to see their preconceived notions get destroyed, like on this last call on labels, we had somebody who was talking about relationships that they were in, and they realized that the label that they should have is was it, I think she said a solo polyamorous, right? And because polyamory gets all these weird things, and she's like, I'm not in a relationship. I have sex with a bunch of people, right? And one of the people is like, okay, so I understand where she is politically. Right. And then later on in the call, she says, I should probably stop calling myself a Republican. And that woman, she said, you blew my mind when you said that. Right. So like there's a whole world of just being able to be in conversation with people, because people are so nuanced, right? They are multifaceted, and, this last call on labels, when you label somebody something, it just makes them one dimensional. Right. And somebody voted for Trump, and you're like, oh, I know all about you. Right. Or, somebody is, polyamory, right? Oh, I know all about you. Right.
Yeah. I'm a believer, like if you took anybody, I make supposed to like this 10 principles for the Democrat Party, 10 principles for Republicans. No one in the United States hits all 10 on either side, right? I mean, you might hit 9 on one, maybe, or 82. But man, if you're hitting all 10, like, I don't know. That's
that's one of the things. So that's one of the things that I love to do, because that feeds my soul, right? And it gives me hope in the world, and it teaches me something every single time. When I'm a tree hugger from when I was very young, right? Environmentalist, and I've always been annoyed at climate deniers, right? And we had a call on climate change, and that was amazing. Right. Like the different people that had different ideas, and almost everybody had to qualify what they were saying, because, they've been vilified, when talking to people that had different opinions than them. But one of the things that I got really clear of is that if there's no hope, right? If we're like, this is it, we're done, we're all dead, if there's no hope, it deadens the creative aspect, right? It has your creative fibers not firing, because there's no hope. Why even look for a solution? And I think we've been doing that to our kids, right?
Yeah,
like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry we fucked up the world for you, but you'll be fine.
You'll figure it out,
right?
You go. Elon's going to take you all to Mars. You'll be fine.
So. Yeah, so that was one of the things that I really got from that one, and I've changed how I speak about it. Right, we have no idea. None of us can predict the future.
No, and back to listening, I'm a firm believer that the world would be a better place if people would just listen, understand, instead of listen to respond. Right, so many people listen to respond. You can see them look on their face like, "Stop talking, so I can tell you why my point is better than yours."
Exactly. Yep. So, and we address that exactly in our roundtables. Because that's just a human. It's just a human thing.
So you do a lot of public speaking.
I like to talk.
Is there a difference when you talk to public speakers? Is there a difference in your preparation, how you do it, versus a small crowd or large crowd?
No.
Same process, same everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mostly when I'm talking to people, even if it's not so much if it's on one-on-one, but if it's to a group larger than that. I'm always wondering, like, what's my intention? Like, why am I doing this? Right. What's the point? And then have conversations based on what the intention is, like what I want them to get out of it, what I want to get out of it, things like that.
So next, I found this on your LinkedIn, on your about. Explain this. Enjoys creating environments, both online and live, in which people experience being connected to what matters most to them.
Yeah. So that was, that was specifically the Be Heard roundtables when I created that. But it's not only that, one of the things that we talk about in a roundtable is a sense of psychological safety, right? And, being in HR, right? Like a sense of psychological safety is a rare thing at work, right? There's some places that people are really comfortable and they can spout off half-baked ideas because they're not worried about, like getting ahead, or what are people going to think about me, or things like that. So creating a space of psychological safety is something that I did we do in the roundtables, but it's also, in my work, when you're, in academia, it's difficult for a graduate student or a newly minted postdoc to be able to like just share their ideas, just spitballing, right? Because they have to look good, right? They have to look good to the postdocs and they have to look good to the professors. And there's this whole hierarchy in academia where, God forbid that, you would voice an opinion about something that a Nobel laureate or the dean of your department is an expert in, right? There's like there's not a safety in being able to just spout ideas, just to spitball, right? And so, we do that in the Be Heard roundtables, but I was also a part of a group that developed a methodology so that you could have those kinds of conversations innovatively. Like if you're looking for like, inside of, you're looking for new innovative ideas, right? We actually developed a methodology so that you could have that kind of a conversation, right? And you can have that conversation using, we used a platform, a graph database platform, but allowed the platform to be a boundary object. So you could actually take a look at ideas, right? You could take a look at words. One of my favorite quotes is George, I'm literally going all over the place with this. This is funny, but George Bernard Shaw, he says one of the biggest illusions about communication is that it's actually happened, right? A lot of people will use a word and because they understand what the word means for themselves, they think it's the same thing of what other people mean by that word. Just like the word field, right? It means something entirely different to a geologist, right? To somebody who's working on electromagnetism, like electromagnetic fields, or somebody who plays baseball. There's outfield, right? Like that word is so loaded because it means so many different things to other people, but we never check in and say, okay, when you say field, what exactly do you mean by that? But we've created a space where we can do that kind of thing. Like, okay, when you say innovation, what does that mean for you? Right. And so people will, we'll talk about, and we've created a way for them to talk about those kinds of words inside of their own context. So then it's like, oh, okay, so I have a context for this and I think about this in a particular way. And somebody else can say, oh, I don't think about it like that in that way at all. I think about it like this. And getting that little bit of interaction, right? And, and it breaks down the levels of like, most PhDs, I actually had to deal with this myself, but most PhDs are really worried about looking stupid, right? It's like to prove that I'm not stupid, right? That's why I got my PhD, right? And I was so close to the end of my PhD, and I was like, wow, I don't need to prove that anymore. Do I need my PhD? And my husband was like, yes, you need your PhD. Right? I've been supporting you for years, so you do need your PhD.
So you do these boards, like how do you make sure it's not dominated by extroverts talking to you? How do you make sure, you entice the introverts to actually say their piece?
Well, so for example, we call this the facilitated conversations, right? And I developed it with the founder of Exaptive, which was the last startup that I worked for, and an organization in the EU called Climate Kick. But you actually we put up words, right? I talk about a boundary object, right? It's a visualization of how people are connected. Like they would have connected themselves to a particular word, like, knowledge management, right? And because it's an abstraction that it's high enough up that it's going to be imperfect, right? But people can then talk about it, right? And so you have that word up, and people will have connected themselves to it. So if you click on that word, and so for example, one of the words that I usually associate with myself is improvisation, and I'll describe what improvisation means to me, right? And then the next person will be connected to that. So I'll just, you can actually call on that person regardless of who they are. So we don't know who they are. We just know that there's a person connected to that. And we'll say, so is that what you meant by that? And I've actually done this with somebody, and his response was like, no, I didn't mean that at all. I got to change what words. I was like, no. It's just, that really is how this works. Your meaning of the word improvisation is different than mine. So what do you mean when you said that? Right. Because for me, the reason I love improvisation is because it's one of the rules in improvisation is you always say yes. Right. So it doesn't matter. Right. It doesn't matter what somebody says. You just say yes. Right. And then have the conversation that way, because when you say no, it just blocks. Right. There's like, you can't go there anymore. That's not usually what other people mean by the word improvisation. So they get to share what that means for them. And then you call on other people, right? And so sometimes the people you call on is going to be the CEO of an organization. And sometimes who you call on is the intern or a graduate student, right? Or an undergrad, God forbid, right? That they would be involved in the conversation, right? But then it allows people to, everybody who's in the room to have a say, right? And then it's, and things about it is, we did this at a conference. I think it was in Copenhagen last year. And, there was about 50 people in the room, and we just, we walked through different terms like that. And then about 15 minutes later, we stopped everybody and we said, okay, so do you have a sense of who's in the room? And everybody looked around and they're like, well, yeah. Right. Cause like one of the biggest problems that people have at scientific conferences, and, somebody actually had it during the meeting that we were having, is that, you take 30, 45 minutes introducing it to everybody, and, and nobody's listening, right? Nobody really cares what they're going on. But when you do it this way, people talk about what's important to them, and, and why they said improvisation or ecosystems or, whatever the word is that we have connected to them. And, because they've got their own context that gets laid out. And so most people had a sense of, well, I know what that face looks like. I know their name, and I know what they care about, right? They don't necessarily know their title, right? Or their pedigree or where they work or any of that, right? But they know the important thing about them to be able to have the kind of conversation that sparks innovative ideas. So.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like you're a group of people, you automatically judge people and whatever. You're like, oh, this person can't make a contribution. And kind of off the subject, but like, have you ever had those hot Cheetos?
Yes.
So you probably know this, but a janitor actually made that.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
This janitor would work for the Frito-Lay company. Every day he would buy regular Cheetos and put hot sauce on it and shake it up. And then that's how hot Cheetos came, right?
That's
and
awesome.
And I could imagine some random janitor, I'm sure it made him like millions and millions of dollars.
Maybe.
Right? Yeah. I just hope he got some to cut though.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
I actually know the guy who invented USB.
Oh,
but,
wow.
But he worked for a big software company. So he didn't.
I just remember those sticky notes, post-it notes.
Yeah.
The person made that got no money because he worked for the I think it's called the M Corporation.
Yeah.
So they got automatic as intellectual properety.
Right. Right. And so, so I do hope that people, and that's one of the things that, we can start talking about, the way it's set up. People expect that ideas should be free, right? Like, I don't need to pay you for your idea, except like sometimes that's a hard thing to come up with. So how do you give people credit for their ideas?
A bonus or something, right?
Or something,
or a cut of the, because so Netflix has a movie about when Michael Jordan signed with Nike long back in the day. Yeah. And he wanted to go with Adidas. And so the money matched. And so Michael Jordan's mother said, we'll sign with you if you give us percentage of the shoes he sells across the world. First, Nike said, no way, like, it isn't done like that. And then it's had best ideas. And Phil Knight said, okay, screw it. Let's go all in and give them no money of each shoe, which had never been done before.
That's awesome. Yeah. So it's got to be done you gotta break the rules a little bit to have it be equitable, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to go back to labels, right? So first, I think it's bad. Like if someone labels me as 3 different things, right?
Yeah.
That's bad. But isn't it just as bad if I label myself a certain way?
Well, it depends, right? You know, I when I was introducing myself during the labels conversation, I said I'm a tree hugger, and I was a socialist from a small child when I lived in the socialist country up north, and then moved down to this socialist country, right? And I did it on purpose, right? Because I wanted people to start to deal. You know, I tell people, look, you might get triggered, but you know, this is a safe place for you to get triggered, and then you can just come back to the conversation. And there was a retired cop on the call, and he says, like, I was so triggered when you said tree hugger and socialist. I didn't know what to do with myself, right? He says, but I could really see that, you know, because once you start to get to know people, you're like, well, you're awesome though. Why would I hate you just because you call yourself that, right? Or, you know, and you sometimes you label yourself something and it's good, and sometimes you label yourself and it's limiting, right? You know, non-binary, right? Like that's a label, right? You know, my best friend, she was given the name Karen. And then when it became derogatory, she's like, well, I never liked it anyway. So why, why would I keep it if every time I hear it now, it's turned into, you know, this horrible thing that means like a middle-aged white lady who's entitled, and you know,
I want to speak to the manager.
Right, exactly. And
Or
she says,
and
she goes, and I'm a middle-aged white lady. So, you know, it's like, it's already bad enough. So she changed her name, right? Even though she thought she was going to be labeled a hippie, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I know, like labels, like, you know, I think they take us through, like, you know, most people say tree hugger, right? First off, most people had like someone like at a tree stopping thousands of jobs from coming, right? Or something like that, you know, or like to extreme, right? But it's not really like that, I wouldn't think.
right. You know, but the thing is, you know, so labels they can make it easier, right? You know, but then they can also like they can box you in, right? So, you know, there's our hope with that particular roundtable was that people wouldn't stop at the label, right? Like, you know, just there's, you know, we had a roundtable early on about Trump, right? And so that there were people on the call who, you know, voted for Trump and who love him and thought he was great. And you know, there was a space of, you know, we're not out to change anybody's mind or convince anybody. We're just, you know, having people be in a conversation, even when they don't agree with what's being talked about. So that was really hard for a lot of people, right? You know, just to be with somebody like, really, you love them, right? You know, like what?
Yeah, I don't know about love any of them.
Right, exactly. Exactly, right? But you can kind of get a sense of the labels will have you, you know, we had one guy on the vaccination call, and people are like, well, if that guy is going to be on the call, I'm not going to be on the call.
Yeah.
Right. I refuse. Right. And actually the people who are on our calls, it's pretty wild, you know, like we've got a lot of people who we love and adore who just won't be on the calls because they will not be in a conversation with the other side.
Yeah.
They just won't. They're like, I'm not giving them a platform. I'm not giving them a voice.
That one thing that killed me, right? Like when people say don't give the platform, because I remember a couple months ago when Connie West said all that Jewish stuff, and this guy named Lex Fridman had on his podcast. Lex Fridman, he was like me and downloads the podcast, and he blasted Lex Fridman of giving Connie a platform. But Lex Fridman was like, well, I want to have a conversation with this guy and see what's going on, right?
Right.
So always kills me say don't give someone a platform.
Right.
How are you going to know their ideas and all that kind of stuff?
Or
and disprove their ideas.
Right. Or even, yeah, that's the other thing. Like, you know, if you're not willing to be exposed to ideas, like there was somebody on one of the calls said that, you know, financially Trump did great. And I was like I heard the words, and then I thought, well, I should go look at that because I know my filter bubble definitely doesn't say that. Right. You know, so there's a whole world of, if you're willing to listen, at least you can then even go explore it. Right. You don't have to change your mind on things.
Yeah.
That guy who was on that vaccination call, he got heard. Right. Like he shared his point of view and everybody listened, and he'd never had that experience before, being heard. Right. And then somebody else on that call said, well, there's a voice that hasn't been heard yet, and it's not necessarily my voice, but I think somebody needs to speak for this point of view. And she just talked about how vaccination protects the community. right? Like the whole, and it was, people heard herd immunity a lot, the whole thing, right, during that. But because this gentleman had been heard on the call, he'd never actually really heard that argument in a way that made any impact. And he was like, wow, I got to stop being such a dick on Facebook, right? Like, and he actually did, tone down his rhetoric, because it really, his experience of being heard, right? One of the things that we say is that our mission is to create a world where when, people, when they're heard, they actually have the experience of being, there's more love in the world, right? Their hearts are opened a little more. So
yeah, it'll kill me like people say, vote for anyone but Trump, vote for anyone but Biden. My thing is like, okay, vote for, but it's not it's Trump or Superman,
right.
The choices of Biden or like,
Right.
or a reincarnation of JFK, right?
Yeah, if I had my druthers, I'd rather not vote for an old white guy.
Yeah, actually, that's my wish. Number one, can we have somebody besides Trump or Biden, and can we have somebody at least 60 years old younger, right? I mean, I don't think that's a high bar.
It's not a high bar. It really
but so far, our country has not doing it.
Yeah. Well, it's it's an interesting time right now, right? Like, it's not typical conservative liberal thing.
No.
Now we're like, okay, is this going to be about democracy or authoritarianism?
Yeah.
Like, are we going to go full on fascist? Right.
Yeah. And you look at President Biden, you're like, man, this guy's been in office since the 1920s or something like that, He looks like you remember that show Tales of the Crypt?
Yes.
I mean, it's like, are you kidding me right now? Like, but then it's like, I don't know.
But then the other option, right?
Yeah.
I was born in the United States. Life there. And, while I was growing up, in your obnoxious years, right? So like from when I was 2 to 19, I was an obnoxious American, right? I'm like, I'm American. There was even a civics class in Canada where they had this idea, like, what if the United States is in Ottawa, how would you feel? And I'm like, I don't care. Right. And he's like, what? Right. And, and then, and I was like watching this guy get all riled up because I was an obnoxious teenager. Right. And then one of my friends is like, she's American. Right. And he goes, oh, right. And so I was like an obnoxious American the whole time growing up. And then I came back down here to go to college. Right. And I was confronted by how Canadian I was. Oh my God, I'm Canadian. Right. I was in English class and some guy in the English class was talking about like the horrors of Canadian television, like all the swearing and sex on TV. And I'm like,
all TV is like that stuff in America.
Right. I was like, are you kidding
Germany,
me?
Italy, France, all across the world, there's cussing nudity on TV.
I know, right?
It's only in the United States.
Right. And so I was like, are you kidding me? Have you seen how violent it is on television here? And everybody looked at me like I was weird. And the guy, and they just kind of brushed off what I said. Right. And I understand why that was now looking back. But in that moment, I was like, are you freaking kidding me? I said, would you rather have your kids growing up having sex and swearing or being violent? And the teacher's like, Terri, calm down. And I'm like, are you, and then, but a couple months later, I was talking to my dad. Maybe it was a year later. I was talking to my dad, who still lives in Canada. And it was right after the massacre in Montreal at a McDonald's, right? And I said, how are you doing? And he's like, we're pretty shook up. And I was like, why? Like, that happens all the time. He goes, not here, it doesn't. And I realized, like, when I first got down to the States, I was like, it was the amount of violence here, right, is scary, right? But you get desensitized to it. And so after a while, I was desensitized to it. So that was what would have me say to my dad, it happens everywhere, right? But it was also what would have me say, do you see how much violence is on TV here? And people not understand what I'm talking about, because you just, you have to withdraw from that a bit. And so once I realized how desensitized I'd become to that, I was kind of shocked. And then then I got my Canadian citizenship. So, so I'm a dual citizen now.
Cool. And it's crazy, like how many people have labels on them and they don't match the labels. Like, this is my opinion, right? So President Bill Clinton, he ran as a liberal Democrat. But if you look at his record, he was actually a conservative Republican because
Right.
he got rid of welfare, he balanced the budget. You know, of course, some of that's because the conservatives ran Congress, so he's like a good politician. You know,
You know what? I don't buy it that the Republicans balance the budget. I just don't buy it. Like, look what happened. Look what happened with Trump.
Yeah.
Right. You know, yeah, sure. This whole debt ceiling thing right now, like let's cancel all of Trump's tax credits.
Yeah.
If we cancel all those, that'd go a long way to balancing the budget. So,
and then like the second President Bush, he's a conservative Republican, but I would argue he was a liberal Democrat because like he spent so much money, like he did the war, gave so much money away. President Obama, if you look at his record, he actually was a moderate Republican, not a Democrat, right?
Yeah. I was in it was in Copenhagen a few years back. And this was before Trump was elected. And she's like, what's the deal with, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump? And I was like, I know, right? She goes, she was there exactly the same. And then I realized that she was so far left, right?
Yeah.
So far left that looking at those two, they looked the same. And there's when you actually look at just how skewed we are, like we are so skewed to the right in this country, even the left leaning that, like this, I don't care if I call myself a socialist, mostly just to annoy people, I think, right? Because it's not a bad word, right? We have social security, right? Of course there's people who want to cancel that, but so.
Yeah, just like I watched this thing where AOC, the other thing, she was like talking about, like most people think Democrats are leftists. She said, no, most Democrats are conservative, right?
Yeah.
Like Joe Manchin from West Virginia, the one she said,
oh yeah,
us from the left, we're like, we're not Democrats. So I thought it's an interesting point.
When I first got here, I went down to the courthouse because I'd never been able to vote before because I was an American citizen while I was in Canada. So I went down, got myself registered, and I didn't know anything about politics here. I didn't know anything about politics in Canada because I ignored both, right, while I was growing up. But so it's this tiny little town in the middle of New Mexico, and we're in the courtroom, and my friend was registering across the hall. Like it was a big room, right? And she says, would you like to register yourself as a Democrat or a Republican? And I turned around and I said, hey, Tanya, is Ronald Reagan a Republican or a Democrat? She goes, he's a Republican. And so I turned around and I said, register me as a Democrat, right? Which offended Tanya to no end, but so.
Yeah, New Mexico's pretty conservative too, so.
Well, sometimes some places, the last company I worked for was in Oklahoma City, right? Which is like a blueberry inside of a red bowl of soup, Yeah,
so. Just like Austin and Texas, the same way.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. I love the maps that don't show land, right? Because land can't vote, right? And so when it shows the people, right, and you can see all the swaths of land that have no people in them, right? So.
Yeah. Another thing I think people get wrong too, like Democrats, they're like, no matter what, Trump could do no good. Like there's nothing good to do, or vice versa, you're Republican, Biden can do no good. But actually, every president has done like good stuff for the country and bad stuff, of course, right? But if you're different, like for example, Trump, he did a thing where most people don't know where, like suppose someone's like rich and they sold like stocks or something, right? They will get taxed. Well, Trump had a law where if they invest that money into like the hub zones, like poorly economic neighborhoods, they'd have to pay tax for like 4 or 5 years, right?
Right.
Which is like really did good for a lot of your city business, right?
Yeah.
But no one really knew about it because he publicized, right? And everyone does something good or bad, right?
Oh yeah.
You can't concentrate on the bad.
That's right. Everything is, everything's about sound bites, right? So, people cherry pick data and they cherry pick sound bites and they like
10-second clip.
Right. I guess the left took this statement from DeSantis's lawyers about what does woke mean, right? And it's somebody who is like, I can't remember what it was, but the thing that he added to the end of it was that they take advantage and they think that they don't have to follow laws because, whatever, right? But they just took the front part of the statement to make them look bad, right? That's what, people are doing that, right? So I find I can't watch news much. I don't watch I don't watch news, right? And I don't spend a whole lot. About once a day, I'll check the news feeds, but I do it like on the AP and BBC and Al Jazeera just to get like some.
Yeah, I think Al Jazeera is a really good news source.
Yeah.
I like them.
Yeah.
Versus some other stuff over here. I remember there's like President Biden with some event, and one news or source like basically said President Biden is saving the world. And other ones basically said President Biden is sending us all to hell.
Exactly, right.
Same picture, same everything.
That's that whole thing about science that I was telling you, the exact same thing. And then people just spin it the way they want to spin it. And so it's, I moved up here because I really like being in my liberal bubble. I do, even though my in-laws say that we live on the left coast. I'm like, yes, I do.
Yeah. And so back around environmentalists, like my point of view, like I think everyone needs to be environmentalist to some extent, right? Like for me, like I want clean air, clean water, all that kind of stuff. Do we really need like oil coming from Alaska and Prudhoe Bay? Maybe we do, maybe we don't, because like I grew up in Odessa, Texas. There's so much oil in the Permian Basin, right? Like they've calculated hundreds of years worth and they discover new oil fields all the time. Like, why do we need this different oil? But on the other hand, like, and I talk generally, like, if you're an environmentalist, do you really want to get rid of everything?
Right.
Like, do you want to go back to the 1820s where you like washing, using outhouses, no electricity?
Right. Well, there's the whole thing of nuclear as well. Right. I mean, it's clean.
That's the safest.
And it's clean.
However,
it's really clean. Yeah.
When shit goes down, goes down.
It's safe until something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Right. But that's the same thing with pipelines. Right.
Yep.
And so.
But see, people don't realize like when like there's a Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, I'm sure a couple are missing, but like it's once in a generation, right? Pretty much once a blue moon. But it's bad, right? Oil pipes leak all the time.
Yeah.
Exxon Valdez, it happens.
Blue Horizon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All that stuff. It happens a lot, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So it's, I was in Vancouver to go see Paul Stamets. And, so now we'll meander into psychedelics. So it was the conversation was called How Psilocybin Can Save the World. And he had an elder from the Haida tribe with him, Guja. And it was so impactful having him there. Right. And it was actually really great because first of all, it was like in this scientific light conference, and there was 2,500 people in there, and Guja sang a song for him. Right. Just blessing him. And Paul Stamets said it was one of the most impactful things that's ever happened to him. And he's gotten a lot of awards, right? Because he's spent his whole life just trying to get people back to nature. Right. And, that one of the things he talked about psilocybin is it's highly correlated with people being to nature relatedness, like having people get connected to nature. So, and this goes back to the other thing about where people are connected to the things that they love. My purpose in life is that people experience being profoundly connected. Right. And so that, connected to what? It's always right. It's also why I like graph databases, right? It's all about connections. But, connected to people or connected to the planet or, connected to, what it is that they're doing, like really being engaged and loving their life. It's the whole thing about being great. When you said that, right? I was like, of course, that's why I would be here, right? Because people can become connected to what it is that they really like. And when that conversation with Paul Stamets was pretty remarkable, particularly because Guja was there. And that's one of the things he said is like, people just aren't connected to nature anymore.
Yeah.
They're just not. Yeah.
In terms of psychedelics, like, first of all, like, I have no idea how like marijuana and psychedelics are like a class 1 drug, right?
Oh, I do. Right.
I mean, I know in America goes back to Richard Nixon and all that stuff and all that kind of stuff, which makes no sense. But
it does make sense from a particular point of view. Like we are losing the job force. So, like there's people, tune in and drop out, right? That's what they're talking about. Yeah, why not, right?
Yeah.
And so it's it was psychedelics were a disruption, right? They were a disruption because it was like it threw a wrench into a lot of things.
Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ooh, that's nice. Yeah. So, yeah, that was that whole thing, right? I grew up after that, right? My parents, when I talk, my dad's got 6 siblings and they were all hippies, right? And they all got tired of LSD, right? And my dad used to joke around about one of his buddies showed up with a big old bag of MDMA, right? And he's like, I can't do it anymore, right? And hand it off to my dad. And my dad said by the time he couldn't do it anymore and hand it off to one of his buddies, right? There was still hundreds of pills in that little bag, which just cracks me up, right? But so that like there's a different attitude to and I grew up in the just say no.
Yeah, I grew up like LSD. You take, if you even touch it, you're gonna go mentally insane.
Exactly, right?
Your mind's gonna blow apart, and you're gonna be put in a mental hospital, and all these evil demons gonna come take you over.
Exactly. Right.
And it's nothing like that at all.
Right. Well, the caveat, like there are some people that so I love Stanislav Grof's work. So he did a lot of he was doing a lot of experiments on psychedelics. But when prohibition happened, he'd done enough work to know that that's not the only way to altered consciousness. Right. So he started doing breath work, right? Because experience is just by breathing right or wrong, I guess. However, guess it's your point of view, right? But so there's a whole world of altered consciousness, right? Altered states of consciousness, which I find fascinating, right? As a neuroscientist, I'm all about fucking with the mind.
Yes.
Right. So I love that whole world. And as a scientist, there's a lot of where I concentrated, I got fascinated with G protein coupled receptors. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they're like the most amazing machine ever. Right. But, it's just a receptor on the surface of cells that binds to a molecule and then starts this whole signaling cascade. And just the idea that, this is how you talk from the outside of a cell to the inside of a cell just captured my imagination. And I got deep into that. Right. And then receptors they're the receptors that bind to things like cannabinoids, cannabis, opioids, tobacco, the nicotinic receptors, serotonin, right? Like all of those really cool receptors in the brain, not all of them, but most of them are G protein coupled receptors. Nice. Right. And so, I remember the first time I started a postdoc at UW here when we first moved to Seattle, and a receptor, right? And then my advisor walks into the lab and he says, okay, who needs cocaine? And I was like, oh yeah, I work in an opioid lab, right? It's like, there's there was this whole world of like, wow, I forgot that's like, there's all these other implications to the opiates. Right. And so, that was one of the receptors that I worked on, was an opiate receptor.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people are getting more open, like psychedelics. Like most people don't know this, but like, of course, Texas, like really conservative, right? People don't know this, but like, I might be mixed up. Like that's 4 or 5 years, the state of Texas Republic or House or what it is, they've given like $5 million a year for research for psychedelics to help veterans on PTSD, right?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So there's a whole world of, not many antidepressants work. Right. And, when my daughter went on antidepressants, right. Her doctor just ask her how they work. Right. She'll be able to tell you how they work. Right. And so when she asked me, I was like, we don't know how they work. Right. It's, so just to give you kind of an example, when you close your eyes, right, everything goes dark, right? Immediately. That's a G protein coupled receptor, right? It's like, it happens like this, right? And then there's some that take minutes and all that, but there is no G protein coupled receptor that takes weeks to work. So that's some other process going on, right? Like that's like gene expression, like you're actually changing your mind, right? For the drugs to work. We're not exactly sure how it is. We know some that has something to do with the serotonin receptor and all that. But so what completely captured my heart and soul and mind was psychedelic therapy that actually works, right? One of the things you could say about a lot of mental disorders is that they have in common is that it's a rigid way of thinking about something, about yourself, mostly about yourself. And if you could let go, right? If you could let go of how you think, if you could let go of the grip of it, right? So if you watch Michael Pollan's documentary, there's people who OCD like was just, crippling them in life, right? And then they were freed up from that, right? And people who have depression or anxiety, and that relaxes, right? Like when you see some of the effects of that, right? It's like, yes, we need to study this stuff. Absolutely, we need to study this stuff. And then when you start to look at the different things that we can do, like MDMA to treat PTSD, it makes total sense, right? Ecstasy is, you're experiencing love, but then you're also dissociating a little bit. So you don't, a lot of how we get over things, right? Just expose yourself to spiders more and more, and it's not so bad, right? When we first moved into our house and had the giant house spiders, they were like terrifying, but now it's like, it doesn't scare me too much, except when they're crawling on me, right? But so, but if you just remembering those things, right, that give you PTSD, just send you into another episode, like being able to just dissociate yourself from it a little bit to be able to mess with the memory is good, right? And so it's like, it's amazing. We should definitely be studying this stuff, right? And this stuff works. There's studies back in the 50s where 65% of the people that were in a drug trial treating alcohol addiction with LSD, right? They never went back. They never went back to alcohol.
Yeah.
Right. That's a remarkable number, right? And so we should be studying this stuff. So if there's anything else, like I could talk about this for because there's like so much about the psychedelic renaissance that's happening right now.
But another person was like pro psychedelic, now you never think it was. So a guy named Rick Perry was the former governor of Texas.
He's pro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's like more conservative than Greg Abbott is. Right?
Oh yeah.
He's like, he basically wants everyone. He's like pro conservative, and he's like pro psychedelics. I like that blew my mind. Like psychedelics.
But it makes sense though. If you really, so one of the things I've heard, right, there is that then oftentimes they are decent human beings. They have like these personas that are just obnoxious and ridiculous, right? I don't know, I can't imagine that Bobert and Green aren't obnoxious human beings, right? But apparently some of them just put on a show because that's what appeals to their base, right? But if you are for veterans, right, and because there's study every avenue to help. There's not a lot that works, right? So if you're gonna, and you can only take it so far with meditation and yoga, which do work better than some of the drugs, right? But let's go there, right? And so of course, if you are really for veterans, then you would be pro psychedelic. Yeah, you would be, right? I mean, I know so many veterans, like before the VA used to pump people full of opioids and antidepressants, but I know so many veterans now who do psychedelics. I like to say on the podcast, like, I know I can't say every veteran does it, but pretty much 95% of the veterans I know have done psychedelics or mushrooms or edibles or something, right? And they're all of them say the best thing that ever happened to them. Right. My stepmom died a year ago, and she had esophageal cancer. So it in the esophagus, right, which is like cartilage. It's really hard to, you kind of need your esophagus, so you can't really take any of it out. And she lived in Canada. She's like, thank God, right? Because that most of her pain treatment, she didn't want to do opiates, right? Until the very end, she used marijuana, right? She used cannabis because that's great. And you can get as fucked up as you want on it, right? You can have mostly CBD, right? And then get mildly high, right? So I think it's just, I don't know, morally wrong to like hold on to your political view from back in the 60s without, and the legislation that says you're not allowed to study something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like, I think it's called MAPS. I know MAPS, they've done a lot of studying in the nonprofit, like think of all the stuff we haven't learned,
Yeah. Oh, there's, I back in 2006, I saw one of these studies because they started coming back with, and part of it, a lot of it had to do with MAPS, right? MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, right? And one of their things was, if you can just have people have a conversation about something, it gets back in, it'll come back around, right? And thank God, the conversation is more about, let's use MDMA to treat PTSD for veterans or for anybody with PTSD for that matter, right? And yet let's use psilocybin to treat depression in cancer patients, right? But you've got to study all of the things about it, right? You really should study. We should study gun violence, right? Like that should be one of those things that we have numbers on. Yeah. And the NRA has been really good at blocking. Because they know, right? Knowledge is power. The more you know, the more access you have to something. So. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Psychedelics is funny, right? I mean, all the research could have been done the way you could help people. It's interesting. What's your point on this, right? So I can't remember his name, but you have to know the guy who's in charge of the MAPS.
Rick Doblin.
So he was on Joe Rogan's podcast about a month ago, right?
Oh yeah. And I got to watch that one.
And they were talking about, Joe's name's Joe Robin. He's talking about taking them from nonprofit to investment company where people invest in the company, right? And Joe was like, no, you shouldn't do this because they're gonna be beholden to the investors and it's gonna change your method, But he was like, man, like we're not getting money from the donations, right? It's a nonprofit. If we do what we got to do, we need the big money. So what's your take on that? Should they like go take on investment money or keep on being a nonprofit? What's gonna be the best way for them to do?
Well, so there's MAPS and there's MAPS PBC, which is Public Benefit Corporation. So it's a for-profit entity that is the one that's running their clinical trials. And so it's necessary, I think, really to separate the two. Absolutely. Because that's one of the things that we're thinking about for Love Is My Religion also is to do a for-profit arm where we do Be Heard events for corporations as part of their DE&I training, right? Because they aren't making enough money to have this thing go, right? They're well known. They're well. There's a lot of other companies that are doing research and all that, but this guy, our MAPS, has been in the forefront. And so I do agree that there's, especially in this society, right? Capitalistic society, right? Like there is something to be said for having the market say whether or not this is going to work, because that's how we judge things, right? That's how we determine whether or not something is going to work. It's not 100%, right? Or maybe it is, right? That's, I guess, is the definition of capitalism, right? But if they can make it work in a for-profit environment, then there's a better chance of having it work. And the fact that they did a public benefit corp for that, a PBC, says that they actually have to demonstrate that there is some benefit to the public, right? So that's the whole thing with B Corps, right? Also is like how do you determine whether or not the company that you want to work with is good, right? Yeah. Is not just in it for the money, right? So. Yeah.
So, state of Minnesota is about to become the 23rd state to legalize marijuana.
Woohoo!
What do you think comes first? All 50 states legalizing it, or it gets legalized at the federal level?
I think we should take notes from our friends up north, right? And just legalize it, the whole thing, right? Washington State is having a hard time, right? Being able to sell all of the weed it's growing. Yeah. Right. Like there's elements of, states' rights, whatever. Right. Right? There's a reason that we're a union of states, because it really works to be able to, I can go back on that statement too, as well. Cause then you've got like abortion and like that whole thing. But, there's a benefit to being able to, so I think we should, I don't know, I can't predict which one is going to happen, but I really think it should be legalized federally.
Yeah.
Right. I think, that and in Canada, the interesting thing is, so they legalized marijuana. So all of the laws that had to do with psychedelics were kind of in limbo. So we go up north, you can go and hit the medicinal mushroom dispensaries. Right. So
I could be wrong, but didn't British Columbia, that's where Vancouver's in British Columbia, right? Didn't they just like recently like legalize like all drugs?
They decriminalized.
That's what it is. So it's a difference.
It is different. It just means that, they're not going to, they're going to go after the more heinous crimes, right? Which is, I think, is wise.
Yeah.
Right. There's the they did was it, I think it was Timothy Leary got, because psychedelics were still legal, it was a marijuana charge that they were able to arrest him for.
Oh, wow.
Right. So
yeah, like I don't know, like marijuana, LSD, but like I don't know about legalizing like fentanyl and heroin, that I don't know.
Well, okay.
You see what it does to people in the streets here, especially in Seattle.
Right. So there's and I know these studies are done in rats, right? But this is it's a better model than like a computer simulation, right? And it's better than doing it in people.
Yeah.
Right.
That might be an ethical dilemma.
It's exactly right. There's so many things that are interesting. Like we don't know if there's DMT in the human brain. There's a pretty good chance that there is because we have receptors for it. And, but DMT is metabolized so fast, you gotta make the body produce it and then sacrifice the animal really quickly, right? It's hard to do that in a human, right? All the ethics involved, right? So why was I saying that? Oh, so for a lot of the drug studies, right? They one of the things that they showed is that rodents, will press a lever until they kill themselves.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But what they were looking at is, just to put it in lay terms, rats that are bored out of their freaking minds, right? They've got nothing but this white cage by themselves, maybe with a couple other people, right? But if they put them in an environment where they're stimulated, right? Like there's stuff to do, there's like cool, toys to play with, they won't go for the drugs, right? And this is one of the things that I think about science all the time is like, well, how does that apply to human beings, right? When you alter somebody's environment, so they're not confronted with, I would rather escape into this drug-induced haze than to deal with the reality of my life, right? People will stop doing those things, right? They'll stop taking drugs. So, but that also means that what we got to do is like, this is where my socialist bent comes in, is like, take care of people then. Right. Like if people are taken care of, they don't want to do that. Right. Like it's like the biological urge goes away when there's something else in their life. Right. And so, I would love to do that experiment. I think that experiment, but that would be costly, does like crazy ass things. Like what if you just gave everybody $1,000 a month? Right.
Talking about UBI.
Yeah.
Universal basic income.
Yeah. What if, what if, if you took care of some of the basic needs, like I don't have to worry about a house and I don't have to worry about food. Right. And then, I think a lot of the other issues would go away. It goes back to the, when we were studying psychedelics, there was a, they used to call it psychomimetics, right? Which means that it induced psychoses, right? Like that's what they thought was happening, right? The theory behind those studies, the alcohol studies, was that LSD would induce the DTs, right? It would induce a kind of psychosis that would make the people, that like I don't want to go there, right? Like sometimes DCs, you hit rock bottom and there's the only place to go is up, right? So they thought that that's what they were doing. giving them LSD while they were, addicted to alcohol. And it turns out that that's not what was happening, right? It wasn't mimicking psychoses, right? People were just having a different experience, a more expansive experience, you could say, right? And so they like that, excuse me, that was a theory that got thrown out because it was okay to study it, right? That's what you do in science, right? You have a theory, you test it, and you're like, wow, that's actually doesn't appear what's happening with people. So what is happening with people, right? Is it the mystical experience, all of that stuff, right? And so, so I think, to be able to study that, right? It's like we've trapped ourselves, like this whole polarization and how everything's been politicized, right? It keeps us from being able to it keeps us from being able to ask the right kinds of questions or be able to, without it being like,
or you're scared to ask the question because you don't, all your friends are going to blast you and like destroy you.
Exactly. Or I'm not going to get funding anymore. Right. Like every once in a while, Republicans will bring out like some of the different studies that people are doing. Like, can you believe that they're studying sex in ants?
Yeah.
Right. Like without knowing the context for why we're doing that, why, it kind of makes sense, pheromones and ants are way more powerful than humans.
But in the defense on the level, you're like, we're studying why, I don't know, why goldfish or make good pitch, right? Or something crazy like that. On just the level, like, okay, why are you doing that? But you got to dig deeper, right?
You really do have to dig deeper because
most people don't have the time or don't want to dig deeper.
Or they don't want to, right? Like that's the thing, right? Every time people talk about how, people shouldn't be getting money to do those kinds of stupid studies. I'm like, you could fund the NIH with one of the bombers that you're totally willing to pay for, right? Yeah. So let's not, don't tell me about stupid science, right? There's no such thing as just, you should be asking all the questions about all the things all the time. So
yeah. And you actually go into like some kind of MAP psychedelics conference in June, right? Mm-hmm. Where was that going to be at?
In Denver.
In Denver?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I would never expect to be like in, I don't know, Nebraska or something.
Right,
like
exactly.
That. Denver makes sense.
Yeah.
So is that something that annual conference, and what do you expect to get out of this?
I don't know if it's, everything is like since COVID, right? So I don't think it's the first one. Yeah. It's the first one I'm going to. Right. And, I
bet they're going to have some good LSD there.
Well, it's interesting. There's different events. I was booking my flights just the other day. Right. So I was looking at, okay, what talks do I want to go to? What workshops do I want to go to? So, do I stay for the after party kind of thing? Right.
Yeah.
And most things they'll have disclaimers like, there'll be no selling of illegal substances and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I saw one that said, we do not condemn or condone the sale of illegal. I know, it's like,
so I like that. So if you find the right guy.
That's right.
It'd be interesting expert to me. I think if you had like two people like equally smart on a subject, have them debate, but one is like, yeah, I think that'd be.
You know what though? So so when you're on psychedelics, right? Like there are things that are so profound, right? Like people experience being connected, right? And it is like soul searing. It is mind blowing. Like, oh, this is what it means to be connected or to have love or to love, right? And then you write that down, and then, when you come down off the psychedelics and you're like, well, that's stupid. Love.
Yeah, no.
Of course, everybody knows that, the most important thing in the world is love, but but you actually experience it, like heart-rendingly experience it, right? Being, the last psychedelic journey that I took, it was at a retreat, and I was so connected to Mother Earth. It was incredible. I was blown away by how much she loves us. Yeah. Right. And then, I've always been a tree hugger. Right. And so, people are like, oh yeah, of course. No, you don't understand how intimate and connected it was, right? You know?
Yeah, and you never know what's gonna happen, right? Like one time I was on it, and for like 30 minutes, I was like trying to figure out. So I was listening to classical music, Beethoven. I was trying to figure out, why is Beethoven's name pronounced Beethoven? Why not Beethoven? Like,
Beethoven.
yeah, like 30 minutes, like I couldn't get off that right.
I love that. I love it, the way the mind gets messed up, right?
Yeah.
But there, and that's it's so one of the I did a psychedelic retreat, and the two people who were leading it were shamanic practitioners, and I was so moved by how just by how spiritual they were. I was like, what is this thing, right? Because a long time ago, I had a colleague do a shamanic journey with me, and she says, this journey is going to be to take you to meet your power animal, right? And I was like, I was getting my PhD at the time, and I was like, during the journey, and all of a sudden I was in this snowy wasteland talking to a raven, right? It was wild. It was profound. Of course, then I come back into it, and your mind says things like, yeah, that's just bullshit though, right? That didn't really happen. So I'd had that experience, but after that retreat, I actually took a class on just a shamanic calling, right? And it was and so it was interesting, because when you do a shamanic journey.
No, is that like the Hawasaka thing? What's that with the thing that Aaron Rodgers did?
No, that's ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca,
yeah. That's also psychedelics,
Okay.
right? So I haven't done that yet, but that is on my bucket list.
I know two people have done it. One here and one down in Mexico. They both said it's like the bee's knees, as they say.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you get an opportunity, take it, right?
And I can't say the word to save my life, right?
Ayahuasca.
I can't say it. If someone said say the word correctly, you're gonna die. Well, give me the gun so I can just kill myself.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say that.
So on a shamanic journey, it's sound driven. So remember, I said there's other ways to altered states, right? Breathing, and so this is sound driven with a drum. And so you do drum beats, and it actually does things to your brain waves. I think it takes it into the gamma. But then so you have an intention, right? And then do you meditate at all?
I try once in a blue moon, but not.
Yeah. So I found a great way to meditate, right? And so, but so there's and somebody shared on a shamanic journey that there's the yin aspect to it and a yang aspect to it, and the yang is like where you're actually doing the actual, like you have an intention, right? You're going to the lower world, right? So you find a hole in the ground and you travel down, and then you imagine yourself in a place, right? And then there's the yin aspect, which is then you just still everything and let whatever comes, right? Whatever comes. And, people say, well, it's just happening in your mind, which is fine, right? It's just happening in your mind, or, and so you let whatever the message is to come through. And usually you come with an intention, right? And so there is, with shamanic journeying, one of the things about it, it's cool, is you get to direct how it goes. And I've had some trippy shamanic journeys, right? Like there was a journey, it's called a dismemberment journey, where the fact that I'm a scientist actually really helped, right? They said the intention was to discover what's in the way of you and your own divine presence, right? And so all this stuff came up, like there was relationships that were incomplete in my life, and as soon as I let that go, it's like getting porous, right? Holes in me. And then all this stuff about Christianity came up, and all these and all that went away. And then there was a point where there was just nothing, right? There was literally just nothing. And then just before the drumming stopped, it was like all these rocks clicked back together. It was this road to take me back. And I actually experienced myself become complete, right? And it was trippy. It was awesome, right? And so, but with a psychedelic journey, you're not, the mushroom is taking you, or whatever or the molecule, the medicine is taking you on a journey for you to see. It's going to show you what it's going to show you.
Yeah.
Right. And
you just have to be open to, right.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah. And you have to, like, you can't look away. You gotta, take it as far as you can.
Well, the first psychedelic journey I did, I was, I've discovered on this particular path, just how in control I like to be. Like and when I was I had one experience once of letting go. Well, actually turned into 3. While I was pregnant, right? I was like, while I was in labor, I had the experience of clawing my way to the top of the cracks of my contractions, trying to stay in control. And then, I'd had somebody tell me, don't resist labor. Whatever you do, don't resist labor, because it'll just, the delivery itself, it'll just take forever. Right. And she was in labor for 36 hours. So I trusted her. Right. So here I am clawing my way to the top of my contractions. And then I sat myself down. Right. And I said, look, Terri, you're not getting off this train. Right. There's only one way, and it requires you getting this baby out of you. So you should just surrender. Right. And so the next contraction that started to come on, I thought I was going to die, but I didn't resist it at all. And it's like I sank under black, oily water, and I really did feel like I was going to die. And then it was over, and it was like I came out of the black, oily water, and there's like the sun was shining, like rising. It was like this incredible moment, and I actually knew myself in that moment, just like powerful, right? Like I could withstand that. I didn't, it was fucking awful, but it didn't last forever.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was like, okay, so I know I can let go of it. And I was in labor for 4 hours with my first child, right? Because I let go like that. Right. My midwife said that you are not, whatever you did, you gotta talk to people about that, because that was awesome. Right. So my first psychedelic journey, I was like, I just got to surrender. Right. I've done that before. I know how to do that. Right. And I stayed in control the entire time. There was actually there was a point where I could see all these little bubbles. They were going into specific scenes, and I got close to one, and there was like people in a living room, and I could almost hear the conversation. And the thought I had was like, this is not what I am here for.
Yeah.
Let's go. Right. And so then when I started to come down, I was so disappointed. Right. A lot of people who are disappointed by their journeys is because they won't let go.
Yeah.
Right. And it's funny. Like I really do feel like I learned something. So my family was just in town, and we went to the flight museum. Right. And I was with my son, and we did the flight simulator. Right. And so he was flying. Right. So I was out of control. Right. And I was just trying to fight, just try to kill the thing. But these flight simulators go all the way upside down. Right. And there's a panic button, so you can stop the trip if you don't like it. Right. But there was a point where I was like, just relax.
Yeah.
Right. Just relax into it. And it was so great, because you're strapped in well. So even like my hair's going straight up. It was a blast. And my son almost pushed the panic button.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, no, you got to relax into it.
And that's good advice for going on roller coasters too.
Exactly. Right.
Just enjoy the ride.
Well, it's for really anything. Right. Just to allow yourself. Right. Just allow yourself to relax and relax into it. Right. Let go of control.
Here's some stories on my part. So like, whenever I take it, it's like I can really tell how unnatural cars are. Right. Like if I go to the backyard nature, if I go to the front yard, the cars go by.
Oh yeah.
I can tell like way down the road, this machine of waste and oil and combustion is coming down the road. You sense the unnaturalness, right?
Is it psilocybin
LSD.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. LSD. Yeah. So
another time, right? So at my house, in the front part, you always have spiders all over the place, like spider webs. My wife always knocks them down, right? And so one time I was on it, I swear, this spider said, "Mr. Jason, can you please tell your wife to stop destroying my home?" Like, oh shit.
Did you pass on the message?
No.
Oh, come on.
No. And another time I was out there in the front yard, and they're not, people call them chemtrails, not really chemtrails,
Oh yeah.
So there's like one cloud to one cloud. I'm staring at it, and it's like starts going to become a laser beam. And so I take my fingers and zoom in on it. And so I zoom in onto the atoms of this laser beam, right?
Yeah.
So just stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. Right. But I think that's like once you relax into
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah, you have to relax. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely have to relax. And just the things you see, how your mind opens up,
Yeah.
it's really amazing, right?
Well, so, one of the things as a neuroscientist, right? And I think that's also partly why I like Stanislav's work, because I'm a student of consciousness as well. So Anil Seth has a great book, right? And he talks about how consciousness is just a controlled hallucination, right? It's like it is your brain puts together a picture of what the world looks like, and then your senses actually are correcting.
Yeah.
Like they're looking for the errors in it, right? And it's real simple. Like it's real subtle, actually. His theory of consciousness. And after I read that book, right, it'd be fascinating how I could see the world change, right? We were walking the dog, and Scott says, "Watch out for the dog," right? And I couldn't see a dog anywhere, but then he pointed to it, and all of a sudden this dog appeared, right? And so, and it's, you could say, well, you just didn't notice it beforehand, right? But what if that your mind then created that?
Yeah.
Because then if that's the case, then the world we see is based on our assumptions and our predictions and all that. So it makes sense then that there's a lot of things that we can't see. That people talk about how the indigenous people didn't see the ships as they came in because they'd never seen anything like that before. Yeah. So, and that we know that that's how the brain works. Like it's all associative, right?
Like, perfect example. I was in Vegas a couple weeks ago for a friend's wedding, and me and my friend went to the mall, right? Or not the mall, but the strip, like shopping, like whatever. I used the bathroom, and the sign said bathroom this way, right? So I went the way, went to the end of the road, into the little thing. There's no bathroom here. Right? I just know bathroom, right? Went back. My friend walked me back. I said, "Dude, the bathroom's right here." It was right there in front of me. And I couldn't see it.
And you couldn't see it
until he pointed out.
So what if, and people have had this thought before, like, what if schizophrenics just have less control over what it is that, what if they are seeing something at a different reality, right?
Yeah.
So what if there is a veil, right? And that you could,
what if the multiverse does exist?
Other subtler realms exist as well, right? So there's the whole world of, what are you allowing yourself to see?
Yeah.
Right. And so and Stanislav Grof talks about spiritual emergencies. So especially people who are heavy meditation or spiritual practices, which are designed to open up those kinds of areas of the brain, whatever you call it. Maybe they're not psychotic, right? Maybe they are, they can just see something, right? And, and this became important, when we were looking at when we were in our shamanic class, my husband and I did it together. They talked about spirits, right? And you have to keep letting go of stuff. Like, my mind is like, scientific mind is like, yeah, right. But then it's like, it does damage, especially for people. So, Scott said something about spirits, right? And I thought Sydney was asleep. My child, Sydney, I thought they're asleep. And I said, Sydney says she saw spirits. She's non-binary, and I'm practicing so hard to get the right pronoun. They were asleep, and then they said, yeah, no, the spirit here is fine. It's friendly. And then they told me that when they were very little, they saw a little orange cat following me around all the time. And my first cat was named Pocket, was this little tiny orange cat. And he died, and we lost him and all that. But all that happened before Sydney was born. But they saw a little cat following me everywhere. And they were confused by the fact that nobody else saw this as well. So that was one of,
okay.
Right. And, so that, it being rigid in your thinking can actually get in the way of other people's, well-being. Like, what if that was just okay? What if it was okay to be with a little kid? And adults do so much damage to kids' intuition anyway. They
don't do that. That's unrealistic.
Just making that up. And it happens all the time, right?
So like how all these kids like married their friends. Like, how many of these marriage friends are actually real, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. So there's aspect of, and we do this, kids, you'll get a phone call and it's, really bad news. And your kids would be like, well, what's going on? Are you okay? And you say something like, no, I'm fine.
Yeah.
And then they start to question their intuition, right? And that's not even intuition. They're just like, they're accurate. And then we're just freaking lying to them, right?
Well, then how many times you hear people saying, I dreamt about my brother. He came to visit me in my dream and he died the next day, or something like that. That happens like too many times.
Well, one of the projects that I'm working on right now is around near-death experiences, right? And, and what I'm doing is scientifically pulling out artifacts, right? Ontological statements from people's near-death experience narratives and I'm using machine learning and AI algorithms to pull out these ontological statements, because a lot of them are similar, right? Like if you think about Jungian psychology, right, and the archetypes, right? Like they talk about there being another reality, right? Another dimension maybe we're not seeing, right?
Yeah,
So,
I'm a believer like there's all different type of worlds, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a world of ants, world of spiders, world of grains, world of like philosophy, all these different worlds, right?
Yeah.
You don't pay attention to.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, we don't. Do you like to read?
I used to. I don't read as much. I used to read like a book almost a week. I used to be a real big reader.
I just finished reading Adrian Tchaikovsky's Children of Time. It's an amazing story. But they do an experiment and, they've got a nanovirus to have the monkeys evolve really quickly. And they've got a whole planet where they're going to do it. And something goes wrong and the monkeys burn up on entry, but the nanovirus doesn't. And because they didn't want other mammals to get smart, they just want the monkeys to get smart. It's not good for anything but these particular primates, but they never bothered to make sure that it wasn't good for the spiders or the ants.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so it's like over millennia, how these spiders and ants and the arachnid, the sea creatures all gained intelligence because of this nanovirus. It's an amazing story. Right.
Yeah. So that same podcast I was talking about, Lex Fridman, who talked to Kanye West, he's talking to someone else. They're talking about, alien life and stuff.
Yeah.
And they're talking, like when alien life comes, who are they going to talk to, right?
Right.
Because we assume it's going to be us, right? But they might think
they're going straight for the whales, man. I tell
whales, spiders, dolphins. Like, who are they going to go to, right?
Yeah.
Of course, they got to do, all the cities are with us, whatever. But maybe that's not telling us them.
Yeah.
So.
Well, one of the things, the environmentalist in me also is, everything on Earth is made up of, DNA.
Yeah.
Or it starts with DNA.
Yeah.
So
what's the thing? We are stardust.
Right. But if you come look at the planet, you really can't tell the difference. If you're looking at that level, at the molecular level, you can't tell the difference between a leaf and me.
No, you can't.
Right. So,
that's a good point. Maybe look at the molecular level. Yeah. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
Who knows? Right. And we don't even, not everybody, but we generally, we don't care about talking to dogs or to dolphins or to octopuses.
Maybe they come from like a water-based environment.
Exactly. Right. And so, I really do think that if we were confronted with aliens, we wouldn't even notice that they were there.
No.
Right. They're probably right there.
Yeah. We're presuming they look like us, They might be carbon-based or,
all of our science fiction are bipedal,
Yes.
So
who knew Star Trek was actually a
exactly.
a predictive thing? Yeah.
Right.
That's crazy. So moving on to something else. You already talked about this talk more about this Love Is My Religion nonprofit.
Yeah. It's it was started by one of my best friends. And he was interested in having people talk across religions when he first started it off. And then my husband and I joined the board And we looked at like, how could we make the biggest difference? And that's when we created these Be Heard roundtables. And that was doing easy topics. We've been doing this for almost 4 years now. And we started off doing easy things like men and women, right? Like having them just share their experience and have the opportunity to be heard, right? And then one of the things that we realized is where we had the biggest impact was if we had a conversation that crosses the cultural divide, right? Like the right to left political spectrum, because especially right now, what I think makes the biggest difference is for people to feel connected, right? And to feel like, it's the really, really vocal that people think, well, that's the way the world is. And it's mostly not.
It's not. I said before, I'm a firm believer, if somehow we could take the 1% on the left and 1% on the right and get rid of them, like send them somewhere.
Let them go fight it out on an island.
Yeah, like give them some random island somewhere, right? Because
Exactly.
most people are in the middle. Most people have nuance, like
Wait, so much nuance, right?
on the right, you have like, what's her name? The lady from Georgia, state representative.
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, her. Yeah. Like, oh my goodness, like.
Yeah, they're
are
not
you kidding me?
right. They're not all like that, but it sure sounds like it because she's so freaking loud, right? So, yeah. So, it's nice when they silence her. So, right. Because at least, the adults can talk. Right.
Yeah.
So
She's definitely, I don't know. And so next, talk about I think it's called the Cohen Veterans Bioscience.
Yeah. So that was, so I worked at the Allen Institute for Brain Science here in town. And that's where I figured out that I loved to, educating and talking complex, showing people how to use these free resources. But I also, while I was there, I realized that we are crap at dealing with data, right? It's just, we're not good at it, right? There's this whole thing in open science about having things be fair, right? Findable, accessible, interoperable, reproducible, reusable, so we had this whole world and data's hard, right? And having data talk to other data is hard, right? And all of the work that I did for my graduate work, right? Just giving that to somebody doesn't make much sense because they don't understand what I called everything, right? So I realized that there was a data problem. And when I worked for Cohen Veterans, one of the things that they were putting together was a database for brain science, right? So let's have all of especially in this society, right? We fund based on causes, right? So I work on Alzheimer's. Okay, here's a pot of money to go solve Alzheimer's, and here's a pot of money to go solve Parkinson's, and here's a pot of money to solve other neurodegenerative diseases, right? They're all in the brain, though. Brain cancer, they're all in the brain. But so you're looking at a problem of the brain from a particular view, and people don't talk to each other about them. Data is all in silos. So the idea was to let's get all of the data and put it all together one spot and harmonize it all so that it talks to each other, so that you can understand holistically how the brain works. So that was I went to work there, and that's also where I really started to understand what's going on with our veterans, right? The other thing that I liked about the Magali Haas is the CEO, and she's got this amazing vision. Like, what if we based the drugs that we use on a mechanism of action instead of a gut feeling? We tripped over Prozac, and then drug companies tried to make money off of that and similar things forever. And I remember a time when finding a new drug is hard, right? It takes a lot of time and a lot of money to do it. And so a lot of neuro discovery units were shut down because it wasn't bringing in any money, right? Until psychedelics kicked in, and now they're all back on board, right? But so what they were looking for is like, let's actually look and see if there's, see if we can find genetic markers. Can we find markers for PTSD, right? And everybody said no. That's you're not going to be able to do that, and they did, right? They actually started to show like, these genetic markers show a predisposition for suffering more PTSD, which is good to know, because then, don't have them on the front line, right? Like let's actually be humane about this. And so I loved the whole mentality. And, I went to a veterans, a Cohen Veterans Conference, where that was the first time I'd ever met Beto O'Rourke, right? Because he was just an advocate for veterans, right? It's hard to be a politician in Texas and not be an advocate for veterans, right? For some reason,
regardless of which side of the political spectrum you're on.
Yeah, right. And so, so I got connected to, right, like the plight of it, like what they did for us, and then what they're dealing with now, right? And so, that was a short stint I did with them for a while, and from there, they actually decided not to use the software development platform, the software platform that they'd started using. And that's actually also part of why I came there, because I was interested in people who were doing the right kinds of things with data, right? And so that was my next job. Then I went to Exaptive, which is the company, the vendor that they had been using for their database.
Okay.
For the UI.
So let's suppose you have two people. One, like they like had a normal life, no brain trauma, whatever. And you have like a veteran who like, was it either ID or explosive or hit the head real hard. Can you tell the difference in the brain?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
So there was a I can't remember what sport. I can't remember. Nowinski? What Nowas? I'm butchering his name. So, but he got his PhD, and I think he was in Canadian Football League, something. He was in someplace where they hit their heads a lot. And he went into neurosciences because they were told that, no, you're fine with concussions, right? Like that you're fine. Right. But it turns out that you're not fine.
Yeah.
Right. And he actually convinced, I think it was over 400 football players to donate their brains once they passed.
And that's a big thing right now.
Yeah.
Football players donate brains. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's because of this man. Right. And I forgotten his name. I should probably send it to you. So it's.
And man, can you imagine being a boxer? Like,
exactly.
At least football. I mean, you get hit a lot of football. But you're boxing, and like one thing, like if you're boxing or like UFC or whatever, it's not the actual fight, but it's all the sparring you're doing, right?
Exactly.
Over and over and over. And of course, it's not as hard hitting, but still, a hit's a hit.
It is, and it's not so much the hit itself, but it's the second and the third and the 11th and the 25th hit after. Effect. Yeah, exactly. So that's what CTE comes in, right? And so when you look at brains, you can actually tell.
Okay.
And so in his PhD study, there was 110 brains that he looked at, and 109 of them, something like that, right? 109 of them showed signs of CTE. So you could see, right? And sometimes when they're in when the damage is in different areas of the brain, right, it impacts areas like especially the frontal lobe, right, where all of the executive function, where decision making and risk and all that gets damaged, right? Then you've got some of the emotional things that go on as well. So
can brain damage be reversed?
Depends.
Okay.
Right. We know. So what's the brain, right? The central nervous system is also the spinal cord, right? And we know that it's really hard to fix the spinal cord, right? My aunt is actually, she was hit by a drunk driver and has some damage up in the C region of her neck. And she may actually be classified as a quadriplegic, but she had a hard time. So she's actually, with machines and rehab and all this therapy, she's actually been able to walk with assisted, right? But nothing will pay for that treatment, because it is, right, that the common knowledge is the brain can't be healed. However, there's a book by Dr. Norman Doidge that's called The Brain That Heals Itself. And it talks about several people who, and it's because the people who are treating them didn't know any better, actually went about their recovery you could be healed. Right. So there was a gentleman who had a massive stroke, and his son, just started from scratch again, started from build up his muscles so he could crawl, and then he could walk again. And then, he had to redistinguish and he had to relearn, and he recovered full, all of his faculties. He recovered everything. It took a couple of years. But then, and he died of a heart attack, I don't know, doing something great, like, I don't know, climbing Grand Canyon or something, right? But when they went and they looked back at his brain, there was 97% of his brain, or some incredible amount of his brain, had been damaged. But there's enough redundancy in the brain that you can teach yourself. You can teach yourself to do things again. That's the amazing thing about the brain. The brain will do whatever it is you tell it to, right? But most people say things like, well, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Right. Which is you telling yourself that you can't do that thing. But if you let go of all of that, let go of all of your preconceived notions around that, you could learn to do something, even older. Like, you could learn to do math. You could learn a new language. You could learn to play tennis. Right.
So it's more of a fact you being lazy versus being able to learn it.
I hate the word lazy, right? Because, it's not, it's, if you ever been working out, like I remember the first time I got a coach, right? And I was doing leg presses, right? And there was a point where my mind said, okay, you're done. You can't do this anymore. Yeah. And they said, you got 5 or 6 left in you. Yeah. And I did. Yeah. Right. So your brain is just really powerful, and it will do whatever. Right. And so when it said that I'm done, right. So you've got to go beyond that, and you got to keep
talking about mind over matter.
Exactly. Right. You got to, if you just practice something, right. One of the things that I took on recently was watercolor. Right. So I just keep practicing it. Right. I'm awful at it. Right. Because for the longest time, I told myself that I wasn't artistic. And I'm like, well, that's silly, right?
Yeah, I tell myself the same thing. I tell myself I can't even draw a stick figure.
Right, exactly. But if you just practiced, right?
So I heard this somewhere, like, if you just pick any discipline, right, like watercoloring, right, if you just practice 1 hour a week for a year, you'll be better than 95% of the population.
Exactly. That's it. Because
you're not going to get paid for it,
right?
But you'd be 95% better than the population.
Because your brain will do whatever you tell it to. It will learn anything.
So have you heard of this? So I think 1800s, there was some type of mine in France. They're doing explosives. And so this guy miscalculated. And so there's something got stuck in his head, right? It literally stick out, right?
Oh, the what's this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he should have been dead. He lived 50, 60 years. They studied his brain. He'd a normal life. But this thing was out of his head, and they didn't want to take it out because obviously he would die, right?
Oh, okay. This is not, well, they eventually, the one that what's Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage.
Yeah.
Yeah. They did take it out.
Did they? Okay.
They did take it out.
Okay.
But his personality was forever changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It actually changed his person. See, that's the other thing about the brain, right? So
they took it out.
Oh yeah. They took it out.
Okay.
But the part of the brain that, there was something about anger and aggression and all that, whatever put the stop on that was damaged. Right. And so then he was just, out of control. Right. Yeah. He turned out to be a horrible person, all that. So there's a getting into the nuances of brain science again here. Right. There's the whole world of that, if what makes you is the brain, and I'm questioning that, but there are aspects of the brain that it is entirely biological, right? David Eagleman is one of my favorite neuroscientists, and he talks about this in one of his books. There was a man who developed a penchant for child pornography, right? And you don't talk about that because that's so it was this shameful secret that he and his wife kept. She hated it, and all of this, right? He hated it too. He hated that about himself. But then, and then he was had these debilitating migraines. And at one point he had to be taken to the ER for it. And they realized, they did a scan, they found he had a brain tumor, right? So they put him into surgery, took out the brain tumor. Penchant for child pornography went away.
Yeah.
It was a function it was a function of a cancer.
Okay.
Right. So like there was like something in his brain that developed into this, it's kind of weird, right? But very complex psychology, like behavior. Right. And then later, when the pension came back, right. His wife said immediately his tumor's back, and they went and they looked and it was back.
Yeah.
So, if it just goes to point to that, the way we develop and the way that our brains are developed, right, can result in, right. After reading his book, my uncle was a federal defender, right. I want to write a book with him, where, he talked about some of the weirdest crimes that he ever had to deal with. But I want to talk about the like physically, was there something in the brain that could have caused that?
Yeah.
Right. So there's all sorts of interesting questions like free will and all that, in the brain. So
on a scale from 1 to 100, what percentage of the brain do we really know about?
Oh my God, I can't even answer that. We know so much, and we know so little, right? And the other thing about it is that what's really great is that you are uniquely you, right? And that has to do with all of the things that have happened to you in your life, and all of the thoughts you've had, and all of the experiences that you've had, right? And and so that has you be uniquely you, and your brain is, like the different connections that it's made. It's like nobody else is in the world. Right. So we do know like the basic cabling, right? We know that, there are connections to the different areas of the cortex from the striatum. We know that, like, there's like, you've laid the basic cabling, but the actual connections down at the cellular level, which produce the things that we think and the memories and all that kind of stuff, are different. So, we know where genes are expressed in the brain, right? We do know that, right? We know a little bit less about what proteins are expressed where, because gene expression doesn't map onto protein expression, right? And proteins are the things that build the structure. Like there's stuff, and so I can't answer that, because to answer that question, I'd have to know what 100% was, right? And
that was a very scientific answer.
Yeah, well, exactly. Right. But there's like nuance in that, right? I could give you a number, but then I could never back it up.
Yeah.
Right. So
do you think we're at the point where we can do brain transplants?
I doubt it.
Okay.
Because who knows, right? Maybe, there is a dissection at McMaster University in Canada, where they have dissected everything away except for the nerves, right? And so you've got this, right? It's the peripheral nerves are still part of the brain, right? It's just an arbitrary thing that we say, like there's the outside the brain and inside the brain, right? But where does that end, right? So to actually take the brain out, right, and put it into there's just so many connections that would need to be remade that it doesn't make sense. I think
so we have to wait for aliens to come give us the technology to do that.
Exactly. Or I think it's way more likely that we'd be able to upload a consciousness at some point than to be able to do a brain transplant. So, and who knows, right? I've been reading a bunch of science fiction about transfer of consciousness, which is awesome, right? So
have you watched a show called Your Million? It comes on Nat Geo. So basically it's Your Million, like stuff like futuristic scientific stuff.
Oh no, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
so one of it is like this couple's daughter's about to die. So there's asking the limo, do we upload her? No, basically it was like, do we make her an android? She stays around forever.
Right.
The wife wants to upload a consciousness to live forever. The husband doesn't want to,
Mm-hmm.
Another thing was like, in the future, like suppose you come down with cancer, you get an injection of cancer fighting robots, little tiny antibodies.
Yeah.
And they kill the cancer, all kind of future stuff, right?
Yeah, that one's even closer. That one's even closer than, but that stuff that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like there is so much stuff that we can, have you watched Black Mirror at all?
No.
Black Mirror is awesome.
Okay.
Right.
Check it out.
It's just science fiction but it's like, technology gone wild. And there's one, what you just said reminded me of one of the episodes where a woman's husband died. Right. And she's just like grieving, like she's got a whole bunch of grief going on. And this company calls and said, well, there's enough sound recordings of him and we could do this now.
Yeah.
Right. There's enough
companies that do that right now.
with sound recordings of him that we could like let you talk to him via the phone. Right. Just to, and so, she would talk and then, then it gets better. And they says, well, we could actually upload into a body. So this body comes. Right. Yeah. And it's like, it looks just, but it's interesting because there's one point where she's like, like apparently he's horrible in bed because he never puts that stuff on Facebook. Right. Mm-hmm. So there's like a lot of the internal stuff that they could never know.
Yeah.
That just makes that creature, that thing that they created really shallow because it's just all the good stuff. Right. Yeah. They didn't, it doesn't talk about any of the difficult times or the negative emotions because, most people don't want to talk about that. No.
I'm a firm believer that whatever you can imagine, you can do. Right. But maybe not right now. Like, go back to Star Trek in the 60s, with the flip phones, the microwave ovens, all the stuff they did. Now that's all true, right?
Right. And who's to say that it's we have that now because somebody imagined it once.
Yeah.
Right. Like you said, right. We can do whatever we imagine. There's a lot of amazing things that they do on that I like to think about in Black Mirror. Right. Yeah. Because it's like
what it comes on. What does it come on?
It must be Netflix.
Netflix. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
it's like a TV show.
It's
TV show?
Yeah. If you're going to watch it, don't watch the first episode.
Okay.
Don't watch it because that one is like shocking. Mm-hmm. Right. And who needs to see Prime Minister fucking a pig? Right.
What?
Yes, exactly. So it's just like, if you watch that one and like, that's your introduction to it. It's kind of like, well, this is a stupid show. I'm not watching these. So watch them in any order that they come. That just strikes your fancy, right? There's a terrifying episode that I loved, right? So there's a lot of episodes, and you've got like 5 seasons now to choose from. So yeah.
Thank goodness we were able to binge watch TV shows now. Right?
Exactly, right? Yeah, and this is one of the ones where don't watch it in order because you don't have to. It's like because every episode it's like Twilight Zone only on steroids.
Right. So next, let's talk about your first love, astronomy.
Yeah.
So what got you interested in astronomy back in the day?
Okay. So I was 8 years old and I walked into the library and my best friend was reading a book. And I said, what are you reading? And he said, oh, you wouldn't be interested in it. It's a book on astronomy and girls don't do astronomy. So I was 8 years old when I decided I was going to be an astronomer. And it wasn't, there was no malice.
Despite him?
It wasn't despite anything. There was no malice, but I was just confronted with, you can't do this. And I'm like, yeah, I can. Right. And so 11 years later, I'm a freshman in college and I'm crunching numbers at the Very Large Array in New Mexico on the plains of San Agustin. That's the radio telescope that's got the 27 different telescopes, Jodie Foster in Contact, that one. Yeah. I was working there and I was like, what the hell am I doing here? I don't want to do this. Right. And so I just did it is because it was a decision that I made when I was 8 years old. So there was no thinking or exploring or anything about it. So I got my physics degree and then, I started to do environmental sciences as well. Cause I've always been a tree hugger. Yeah. Right. And then I took a couple biology classes and I found G protein coupled receptors. That's what had me on this path now. I still love the stars and I still love, everything that, astronomy and the idea of science fiction and space exploration and all of that stuff. Right. But how I started and it was actually, when I saw on Facebook once, there was somebody who lived next door to somebody who'd gotten a letter from Carl Sagan. Right. And they'd written Carl Sagan and they asked him, what astrophysics classes should I take as an undergrad? And his response was, don't take any astrophysics classes. Yeah. Just get your basics in physics first and then go into astronomy studies. astronomical studies. And I really wish that somebody had told me that, because, I started to take astronomy classes while I was in college, right? And actually worked there without having all of the background knowledge that I needed, right? Like, without working my way through differential equations and all that stuff. And so it would have been, I think I may actually still have been there had I not jumped straight into astrophysics, right? If I'd actually just gotten my physics degree and then went into it when I had a broader understanding of it.
I'm sure you've been watching all these James Webb photographs coming back.
I know, they're amazing.
I mean, it's like, I make this every day. They find like thousands of new galaxies.
Exactly. It's awesome. It's awesome. And it just, the stuff that they're showing and the fact that it's not matching predictions just makes me so happy. It just, because it's a big freaking mystery. The whole thing.
And they're like pointing at dark space, right? There's nothing there. Oh shit.
There's a lot there.
There's stuff here too, right? And it's like, I mean, of all the million planets, just based on stats, has to be something out there, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, has to be something out there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know one thing just to me, like a lot of people like, we want the aliens to come. Like, do you want the aliens to come? Like, do you really want them to come? Like, can we meet somewhere else, like middle of the universe? No. Do you want them to come here first? Like,
there
bad things could happen to us.
Yeah, there's a lot of different, so all we've got is our imaginations on this again, right? And so science fiction is amazing for this, right? And so Jin Liu, he's a Chinese author who wrote 3 books. It's such a great story, and it's hard science fiction. So, we find out that there's other people, right? And we find out, we communicate with them, and then so they decided that our planet looks way more because in their world there's 3 different suns, and so they have to dehydrate, and so like the whole world's unstable, and the idea of having a stable planet, they love that. So they're heading our way, right? But it's going to take them 400 years to get here, right? Which is amazing, right? Because then you've got this story playing out of like, what do we do, knowing that these people are coming and
they're way advanced than us and all that kind of stuff,
right? So and it's a fascinating story. It's an amazing story.
Here's one for you. This is how I think you take over, right? I suppose there's an aliens out there, right?
Right.
More advanced with us, everything, right?
Yeah.
They come to this. If I was them, I would just send one person, right?
You just send one person?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the person says, I'm God.
Yeah.
I'm God, or all over the case to be Buddha, and you show your power, whatever, and then like, that's it.
There's so many stories based on that as well, but the like the Tchaikovsky one, right? That the whole thing was, they sent the monkeys down and all this, and they had put somebody in a sleeping pod, and they were going to be God, right? They were going to be God, to these creatures. They literally are God, right? Which also makes me think, when I think it's, of all the creation stories, I think genetically modified humans is probably what happened.
There's so many creation stories. Like, you don't realize, like,
there's so many of them are the same though.
Yeah, they are.
Right. They are the same.
There's so many like Noah's Ark stories at different places. There's so many like,
right.
Like, people don't realize there's so many like, the virgin birth of, whatever, dating back to
they're all goddess and child, God and goddess and child. Right. Yeah. So, but, if you think about, we keep talking about, to any beings, and if sufficiently advanced technology will look like magic.
Yeah.
Right. So, the way they talk about, in the Bible, they talk about how Eve was made from the rib.
Yeah.
It turns out that it's not the rib, right? It's from a half of a man, right? Just sounds to me like they took, reproductive, like the DNA from one half, reproductive from another half, and they put them together and, created what we are here.
Yeah.
We were probably some of the apes that were walking around, right? Just, and then, with God, right?
Yeah.
Whatever those.
And then the thing that says,
are.
Like the Bible says the earth was made in 7 days, but some people say, well, each day is actually 1,000 years to God,
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, we had to come somewhere, right? So, but did a God create us? I don't know. Then again, are you telling me that 2 small atoms just banged together and this all happened? that's, you know, like,
who knows, right?
yeah.
You know, given enough time, everything will happen.
Yeah.
Right. Like the whole theory about, you know, you'll eventually you get enough monkeys banging away on a computer. Eventually one of them will do the Shakespeare's works.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah, that's
like
true.
random, you know, you give enough time and, you know, which is why scientists like to study like Drosophila, right? Those flies, because they've got you know, I think they die within a day, right? So they've got an entire lifespan happening within a day.
Yeah.
Right. So you can do evolutionary studies on that. Like you can change something and then watch what happens. Where do they evolve to?
Do you think the human race is actually getting smarter, or we've been the same level of smartness or dumbness since the beginning of time? Of course, technology gotten better, right?
Yeah.
But the basic human being, have we gotten
That's a
any
good
smarter?
question, right? I don't.
I think you argue we've gotten more ethical, more moral. I think you make the argument, but I've actually gotten smarter.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, you know, we went to the I was saying we went to the museum, the Museum of Flight yesterday, and they were getting ready, you know, and if you've watched Hidden Figures, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, they're getting ready to launch a rocket, right? And they've got these notebooks. They're flipping through pages, right, on these notebooks, and it was like they didn't have computing power. So what do you mean by smart? Right.
That's a good point.
You know, because
there's obviously different kinds of smarts, and
who's to say that right, like who's to say somebody who speaks to spirits isn't smart, right? You know, like there's some people who would say, well, that's definitely not smart, right? But you know, I used to be able to remember phone numbers, and in fact,
that's done,
right? But you don't need to do that anymore. But that used to be a measure
that
of
part
how
of your
smart
brain
you
can
are.
be used for something else.
Exactly, right? So like what does smart mean, right? You know, I would argue being able to make leaps, right? You know, that aren't like logically following. You know, I've got a novel in my brain somewhere about, you know, how like the people who are really innovative, like they make a leap. It's like they didn't follow a path, but they could jump a chasm, right, and have something come together, right?
I definitely, there's like once in a generation people come, like, you know, obviously Leonardo da Vinci, like Nikola Tesla.
Maybe, but you know, maybe that's just okay. So, you know, maybe that's just white privilege, right? You know, who's to say?
I mean, there's like all the stuff happened in Africa, Asia, you know.
Exactly. Who's to say
China was so far ahead of us and everything.
Who's to say how many Beethovens, how many Einsteins
that we don't know about?
That we don't know about because, you know, they died early because of dysentery, because they don't have clean water.
Because they had, like, you know, lug water 2 miles a day for $1 a day or something.
Because they grew up in Flint.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Flint, yeah.
You know, so like, that's the whole thing about smart. Like, what is that? You know, if you, there's so many comics about how if you judge a fish by whether or not they can climb a tree, they're going to look.
The meme, like you have the final test, climb a tree, you got the fish and all this different stuff, you know, and like.
And it's just the monkeys, right? Yeah. You know, so, you know, and that's how we measure smart, right? You know, that for a long time, we were really clear that, you know, I remember when I was growing up, I was like, what do you mean? You know?
Yeah, of course they do.
Exactly. What do you mean by that? Right.
Yeah.
You know, and first of all,
that's blasphemous right there.
Right. But, you know, first of all, how did they figure that out out? Right. You know, they just had an idea and they're like, that doesn't conform to my worldview. So
this popped in my mind. So when X-rays first came out, supposedly when someone was dying, they would try to take put the X-ray to try to take the X-ray of the soul leaving the body. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. And I don't think so. So there's a whole world of like, what is consciousness, right? You know, I worked at the Allen Institute with Christoph Koch, and he's probably one of the foremost researchers on consciousness. And for long decades, he's been looking for neural correlates of consciousness, right? And so, you know, what if it isn't low in the brain, right? Who knows? Maybe, you know, maybe there is a locus of consciousness in the brain, but it's looking more and more like that's not the case, right? You know, there's like, you know, is it an emergent property of complexity? Who knows, right? There's just so many theories now.
So talk about this, but you're by yourself, you're watching TV, whatever the case may be, and then a memory pops in your head of you having, like, you know, brownies with your grandmother.
Yeah.
And then it's like switches to like you're playing baseball.
Yeah.
And like all these memes that pop in out and out and have nothing to do with each other, right?
Right.
What's
Well,
that about?
It's not.
How does that work? Like there's no correlation. Well, to me, there's no correlation, right? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't.
Yeah. Well, I'd like you to consider that there is. Like that's how the brain learns things is you associate things. So you'll find yourself like, you'll go on a tangent, right? And you're thinking about a yellow pencil, and then you think about a school bus, and then the last time you were on a school bus, and then that person, and I saw that person look just like that person, and so it is connected.
So I guess there's a very phrase that like you start with number one, we'll say oranges, and thought number 10 is like something like nowhere close to oranges. Like how's that thing go?
Yeah. But it is a path, right? How we learn is we associate things with something that we know. And that's also how the memory works is right. So you can find yourself. And so I was saying about meditation, right? For a long time, I tried to meditate and I couldn't meditate. And then I started meditating with Sam Harris. So he's a neuroscientist. And I like to think that what he did is he's got enough background on how the brain works that he really does just help you trick yourself into meditating. And, a lot of what his meditations look like are just you noticing all of the stuff that comes up, like any sensations you have from sitting, right? And then noticing like sounds that happen, and then noticing like thoughts that come up. And his whole thing is like, notice that you're not doing any of that. All of that stuff is just doing it naturally, right? So your brain, so like you've got no control over the different sounds. Like people will walk in, and the birds will, and all that, but it happens over here in your consciousness, right? And then there's the thoughts that you have that just you don't even have to think to yourself, okay, I'm going to think about elephants, right? It's just like all of a sudden you're like on this path, and all of a sudden elephants show up, right? It's so perhaps consciousness is just a space in which all of that arises. So he does a great job. And so, you find yourself meditating, and you find yourself starting to get really good at meditating, just allowing your brain to do what it does, and then just to notice what it's doing.
Also, it's amazing. Like if stuff when I was a little kid, like when I was a little kid, I used to stay with my grandparents for the summertime, right?
Yeah.
Every day I walk my grandmother to the post office. Every day we go to the local corner store, general store. She would buy me orange soda and a thing of Starbucks.
Yeah.
So whenever I see orange soda, the Starbucks, my heart melts, right?
Yeah.
And if someone says they don't like Starbucks, like you're the devil.
Oh, exactly.
You're
right.
the demon. Get the hell out of here. What the fuck's wrong with you?
Because it's like it's got such a thing in your heart, right? And so, which is also where we start getting all xenophobic about people.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I remember. So
you're saying don't call people don't like Starbucks demons?
I know. Exactly. I remember somebody telling me like, you can't like Peter Gabriel. His music is just awful. And I'm like, I do.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I like it. I like it.
Yeah, right. But the idea that I like, it's wrong for me to like what I like, right? Yeah. It's just kind of weak, heavy metal. And I'm like, I don't understand.
So something totally random, right?
Yeah.
Back to psychedelics.
Yeah.
I don't care what anyone says to me. No one could tell me that Led Zeppelin didn't make all the music on LSD. Like, I don't care what you say. They made that music on LSD.
I had a.
You can't. There's no way you can convince me otherwise.
I should share a playlist with you. That's just a friend of mine. He did a lot of acid when he was younger, but there's a like. I had a friend. There was a bunch of us sitting around, and this guy was really straight laced, and he was like, "Why would anybody smoke marijuana? Like, why would anybody do that to themselves?" And a bunch of us potheads are sitting around, and one of them said, "Because of music."
Yeah.
And he was like, "What?" And he says, "Music is totally different when you're high."
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so it's funny because I was exposed to a lot of Jethro Tull and Moody Blues and all this psychedelic music. And then when I went back to listen to it as a teenager, I'm like, I don't understand. Right. Like, cause there was definitely a space for that. Right. And then, then when I started getting interested in psychedelics, right. And then there's something that happens with music.
Yeah.
Right. Like the way your brain takes in music, it's amazing. Right. And so, this is also, so I was raised Catholic and, a long time. And mostly because the music is so amazing. Right. Like there's the composers there, they knew how to mess with the mind, right? And like you'll listen to some of them, like there are some composers that are synesthetes, right? Which means that they can see colors. I mean, they can hear colors, right? So like a note has a particular color to them, right? And if you listen to their music, sometimes it sounds a little off, but once you realize they're synesthetes, it's because seeing the music, right? And so it's got to, that particular note combination, did something in their visual field, right? So which I'm fascinated by, right? And so that's one of the things about,
and it all syncs together.
Yeah, on psilocybin, right? If you've got your eyes closed and you're listening to music and you start to see colors, just as an experiment, right? Because everything's an experiment, right? Just notice if the same note gives you the same. I did that once, right? And I was like, wow, it's the same color. The note is always the same color. So I was watching the colors shift, but I could relate it to the actual sound. And I'm like, this is synesthesia. This is amazing.
Yeah. One time I was on it and like, I was looking at Led Zeppelin. I was watching like a nature show, like sea creature and stuff. And like all the sea creatures were like lip syncing perfectly to Led Zeppelin. Like, I know what it's like,
Yeah.
So, it's insane.
It cracks me up how cannabis is so dangerous, right? But if you watch, I've had my kids, right, when they had their friends over, I'm not saying whether or not they were in college or not yet, but they all they wanted to do is turn on Animal Planet, right? Or Blue Planet, right? And watch that. I'm like, really?
That's the indicator.
Yeah. I'm like, that
might be an indicator.
Yeah, exactly. Is that, that's dangerous? Really? Yeah. So.
Yeah. One thing about marijuana, like I know some people out there, they say, happen to be focused, energetic. Some people say like, oh man, I can't do anything on it. So I think it definitely affects people different ways.
Well, so let's little brain science there.
Okay.
Right. So the most abundant receptor in the brain is the cannabinoid receptor.
Then I know that.
It means it's everywhere, right? Which is why people use it for anxiety. Mm-hmm. People also get anxious when they're on it. They get paranoid while they're on it. People use it to sleep. People use it for their appetite. People use it for pain. People use it for being creative, because the different strains, the different terpenes.
I have a good friend, like he tells me like he has an anger problem. He said if he feels something angry, he takes like a 10 mg Envil, and then he's like,
right,
anger's gone.
Yeah. So it's those receptors are everywhere in the brain, right? And so like the question that I think is fascinating is like, well, why are they everywhere in the brain? What are they doing? Right. So the cannabinoid receptor researchers, they were fascinating. I'm sure they were all potheads as well, because, you can't study such an interesting drug that has such interesting phenomenon and not want to understand what it is that's happening.
One thing I do kind of wish, like when I was growing up, you got your 10 dime bag of weed. Now you go to the store, the dispensary. How do you want to feel? Here's 20,000 options.
Exactly. Right.
Like, you can drink it, smoke it. Like, no, it's too many options.
Well, it's because there's a lot of different it's such a combinatorics problem. It's awesome. But I remember when I first went into a dispensary, and I was like, okay, so it's been 20 years since I've done. And he says, oh yeah, okay, hold on. Right. And
they start you off at the kiddie level.
Right. Well, no, he pulls out some AC/DC, which is primarily CBD. And he says, so first thing you got to know is this shit is way stronger than it was 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
So if you get a little green, which means you start getting sick from being too high, take a little of this. Yeah. Right. And I was like, okay, that is some information. That's good to have. Right.
Good information.
And then I said, well, I like feeling giggly and all this kind of stuff. And then I learned a bunch of stuff. Like I was like, I thought for sure I don't like indicas. Right. But now, right. I do edibles now because, I don't like smoking, except when I'm with my dad. He's got these amazing double water rigs that are awesome. So I don't, it doesn't, my dad's been a pothead since he was a teenager. So, but, so there's, you get to tweak it any way you want. Right. Yeah. And, my mother-in-law, when she was dealing with cancer, it was, for a long time, she's kind of conservative. So she's like, no, I'm not going to try that. That's like, drugs are bad, the whole thing. But then she was like, okay, she has adverse experiences with narcotics. Right. And we're like, it would, for pain mediation, that might actually be good. So she finally said that she wanted to do that, but you should talk to somebody who, so the cannabis that her other son bought her was high in THC. So she got really, really high.
Yeah.
Right. And, there are some strains that are narcotic like. So she had the same experience that she did on narcotics. Right. So, so that was like, she's like, okay, I'm done. Right. Which is too bad. She should have had a heavy CBD with maybe a tiny bit of THC. But again, if you're in prohibition, you can't even study that stuff. You can't even talk about the different, and now we can at least start to talk about all the different things. Like, what is it that makes me giggle?
Yeah.
Right?
Like me, I can't do indica. If I do indica, I'm out. I'm out.
But if you want to be out, that's the perfect thing to do.
Yeah. So I can't remember his name. He lives in Edmonds. So he has a show on PBS where he travels around the world and stuff.
Rick Steves. He is an advocate for the cannabis.
Yeah,
yes.
He is. He's like, my grandmother takes this.
Yeah.
For pain. You telling me something my grandmother takes to make her life better is illegal?
Yeah.
Get the fuck out of here.
Exactly. Right. Well, it's the whole thing about like making. So here's this is one aspect of the whole psychedelic renaissance that I find very troubling, which is the drug companies, like I said, they stumbled on Prozac, right? And now they're like, ooh, this stuff is good. So how do we patent psilocybin?
Yeah.
Right. Like you don't, right. But the way you can do it is you can create a molecule that's not psilocybin, that's not like in any plant medicines, but that has the same kind of effect. Right. And they're looking for like, well, let's see if we can isolate the antidepressant aspect of it. Yeah. And because then what they can do is they can patent that, put it in a bottle and give it to you for the rest of your life. Right. Like it's the next Prozac kind of thing. So, I talked to a friend of mine and she says, yeah, we're taking the fun out of fungi. And I was like, okay, but why would you do that? Right. Cause like, what if, so for me, like there's a lot of people who advocate for why would you experience pain while you're in labor? Right. And, and a lot of spiritual traditions would talk about it being transformative, right? Yeah. But I also agree with like, pain that's like chronic pain. You should, I'm also, I'm training to be a hospice volunteer. Right. And, one of the things about hospice is like, pain, treating the pain actually helps the quality of life. Yeah. But, so there's the whole thing about it being transformative, like being able to move through the space. Right. So I was saying that.
One good thing about pain, if you have pain, at least, you're alive, right?
Exactly.
So it's a living experience. So, pain can be good, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, my stepmom who had esophageal cancer, right? She treated a lot of that. That's pain because she can't breathe. Right. And because there's something growing in her chest that they can't get out. Right. Like that's a good kind of pain to treat with medication. And it's,
and like people have different pain. What's the word of pain? Like pain, not limitations, but a pain. We have like different pain levels, right? Like my pain level is different for yours.
Yes. Thresholds.
Threshold pain. Yeah. Pain thresholds.
Yeah. So that one, right.
Like for me, it's fun. Like, if you hit me in my mouth or my chest, I'm okay. But if you pinch me, I'm crying like a bitch. Like if you pinch me, I'm crying like a bitch.
It's funny too, because that's, one of the things they talk about consciousness. And, if you actually really think about it, like your experience, I have no idea what you're experiencing in here right now. Mm-hmm. I'm experiencing what's going on with, all of this stuff in here, but who knows? Like I'm just assuming that your experience is the same as mine. Right. And
but it can't be. We have different backgrounds, different brains, different everything, right?
Right. So how much of this stuff is?
And like I've done this like hundreds of times.
Right.
Like, I don't know how many times you've done a podcast, you're in my environment, big bright ass light. I'm asking these random ass questions, Exactly,
right. So there is that whole aspect of it, right? And so it's
thinking like you're the expert of everything. I'm not an expert. I'm just being curious, asking questions. Like you might be like, these are fucking dumbass questions Jason's asking me, right?
Yeah.
Or you might, you never know.
You never know, right? That's why I appreciate you asking the question. Is there anything you want me to ask you? And I'm like, nah.
Yeah.
right? Let's have this be a meandering pond kind of thing, right?
So
Pond, river.
What's
That's the bourbon.
What's your favorite publication you've done so far, and why?
My favorite
That you've
publication.
done. That either you got the most out of, had most impact, or you just had the most fun doing, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So my dissertation, nobody's read that, right? Nobody's read my dissertation, but it really was.
Well, hopefully your panel read it.
Right. Exactly. Right. But it was a lot of different things. Right. And I think, I liked, there was one paper that I wrote in that, right? It was the first paper that I ever wrote, but part of why I loved it so much was because, I said, I heard about this, G protein coupled receptors, right? I heard about this meeting, a receptor meeting that happens once every 4 years. And because I was just a brand new graduate student, but I was like, I want to go to that meeting. And so, I submitted, I submitted 4 years later, I submitted an abstract, and it was accepted. Right. And in fact, they actually gave me a slot where I could give a presentation. And so I gave a 10-minute presentation, and it was just different, an analysis of kinetic states of a receptor binding, right? It's like that's so in the weeds, right? But I got to present it to Bob Lefkowitz and Brian Kabilka. And so these were big names in G protein coupled receptor research. And in fact, they won the Nobel Prize several years later. So the fact that I got to talk about that science with them and stupid little things.
That's freaking cool right there.
Yeah. Right.
That's to me, that's bragging parts right there.
But the cool thing about it was there's stupid things, right? Like they were annoyed that nobody was on time with their presentations. Right. And I have this, I want people to be respected. Right. And one of the things that I thought was most disrespectful is you're given 30 minutes to talk and you talk for an hour and a half. Right. That just is disrespectful of the highest order. So and I had that from very young.
Basic manners right there.
Exactly.
That
right.
Goes up with, I think.
So I made sure that my presentation was 10 minutes and they acknowledged me for that. Right. And I was really pleased with that kind of thing. So, and for some reason, I make sure that I'm on time with stuff. So I like that.
So here's one for you. Let's suppose, first of all, have you heard this before? If you want to make sure you're unemployed for life, get a PhD.
No, I haven't, but that's awesome.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, right? The reason I got a PhD is because I never wanted to leave school.
Yeah.
Right.
School's a great time, right? You're in your little bubble, you're enjoying yourself. You're you're kind of isolated,
But it was also just, I got to learn about physics, and I got to, the different jobs that I had. I worked at the Very Large Array. Then I also worked in a lightning lab where we were inside a big Faraday cage, and I got to do, I got to monitor thunderstorms with radar, and I took another job where I just worked for the provost, and I learned to write, right, and I loved writing. I liked, there was my very first published thing was when I was a graduate student in I can't even remember where it was, but it was just talking about social constructs, right, and it was just a letter that I wrote in, and they printed it. But I loved that aspect, just the banter, right? I actually have a blog called Science Banter, right? Which is just bouncing ideas. I love talking with people and just bouncing ideas off. And
is there such thing as good ideas or bad ideas, or idea is just an idea?
An idea is just an idea. I think it's a bad idea if you throw $1 million at it expecting to get $5 million back. That could be a bad idea.
Yeah, a lot of startups do that.
Exactly, right? But it's not necessarily a bad idea. And chances are it might have actually been a great idea. It was just really poor implementation. So there's no such, thank you for letting me clarify. I just walked through that one with you. Yeah. There's no such thing as a bad idea, right? What you do with the idea, because the whole thing with the atom bomb, was that a good idea or a bad idea? It was a fascinating idea. right?
Especially now, I think that like I read this. I think recently they did some fusion recently. They thinking like in 20 years that we have cure all the energy, whatever. And that doesn't happen if we don't someone back in, doesn't do like atom bomb back in the day, right?
Yeah. I was talking to somebody recently, I can't remember who it was, but they said, I think we're going to solve fusion. And I said, yeah, I do. Like I have the experience that fusion is actually going to get sorted out. And I do think that given where theoretical physicists are playing these days, and that, there's a lot of our reality. So many amazing things. Well, yeah, but we're right on the edge.
Granted, some is scary, like normal person, like, like, oh my goodness, we can't do this, but I mean,
yeah. Well, the whole thing, like, open AI models, right? That those aren't going to kill us, right? And I don't know enough to know if we're actually going to get to an artificial general intelligence, right? But who's to, if Christoph Koch, one of the things he says is that consciousness may be a function of complexity, in which case, the internet may actually be conscious at this point, but then who's it going to talk to?
If Skynet does come, we can all blame Sam Altman.
Yeah, right.
Sam Altman destroyed humanity.
So, but so it's a fascinating question, right? So
it is. So here's a question for you: like, regardless of your discipline, right? Suppose you have a PhD, right? And just to make it simple, suppose you had like 100 things, 100 truths to get your PhD, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Let's suppose 10 years later, it's proven 80 of those things are false.
Yeah.
So only 20 things are true. You have to go back and get your PhD over again?
No, that's what science is.
Okay.
Science is
once
always.
Once you have PhD, you have your PhD.
Yeah, because it's that's the other thing, right? A lot of people say, I don't care what your bachelor's in, but the fact that you could withstand that hell for 4 years means that you could work here. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't buy into that. But
so basically saying, if you can make your life stuck for 4 years, you can work in my psyche company.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. If you can withstand, if you've got a high tolerance for that kind of pain, you can work for anybody.
I'll retort. So you're saying if I can be drunk every day in your company, I can work.
Excellent, right? Yeah. So the whole thing about getting a PhD is just around the critical thinking, right? A lot of how science has moved forward is things are proven wrong. They're like, here's an idea. Let's test this idea. Oh, it looks good. This looks good. This looks good. It keeps looking good. Oh no, it's wrong. Right. And so, you could base your entire, especially if you're younger, your entire career on an idea to have it be proven false. And that doesn't negate what you did. Like, because funding is based on finding new things, which is stupid, right? Like there are so many things that aren't reproducible, but it doesn't matter that they're not reproducible because nobody goes back and checks, or if they do check, you know what I mean? Mostly people just get annoyed, right? But then you can't actually get published disproving something, right? You can only get published by showing something new. So it's another aspect where just the whole way it works, right, is it's looking at the wrong things, right? People trying to get tenure, people trying to get promoted and all that. They can't. There's only certain things that they can look at, right? I think when people get a Nobel Prize, oftentimes they just go what looks like nuts, because they can have any idea that they want, and they can chase any idea that they want, which I think is wasted on the old, right? You should have young people with, minds that are like, really agile, right? And, and with, poor risk analysis skills, right? Like they should be the ones doing really new and exciting things, but it's like they're usually put into a box saying, okay, if you want to get your PhD, you got to think this way. And if you want to get a postdoc, you got to think this way and toe this line.
Boxes and do this thing.
Right. And there's so few jobs if you want to go into academia, right, that it's like, it's painful to get in. So don't step out of line. And, once you finally get tenure, you don't want to lose tenure, and you don't want to lose your funding, because if you lose your funding, they may actually kick you out anyway, kind of thing. Right. So science isn't really especially, in this, the way we run science now, it's not a great place to go into if you're an innovative and wild thinker, right? You might as well go into the startup world and create, innovate, make
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
So what's your opinion? Let's suppose you have two groups of people, right? One group of people, they're all 50 years and above, right?
Yeah.
And there's a good mix of people, different intelligence, whatever the case may be. Basically, the videos, so everything you do to run a society, right? Like electricians, trading people. And then you have a group of 10-year-olds and below who can do the same thing. Which one do you think would be more successful, the 10-year-olds or the 50-year-olds?
To run things?
Yeah, to run society. But what society, like you take what the 50-year-olds and above, put them in like a state of Nebraska, the 10-year-old below, put them in the state of Kansas, right?
Which do I think could do better?
Yeah.
Kansas.
Kansas, okay.
I do. I really do. Because, they're going to try more things, and they're less likely to be married to their idea.
Okay.
Right. Like they don't care. They're like, oh shit, that didn't work. Let's not do that one again.
Yeah.
Let's try something else.
Yeah.
Right. But as you get older, you start, thinking more rigidly.
You
right?
stay in your box, right?
Yeah. And you're like, okay, this thing should have worked. Why didn't it work? Okay, let's try it again. And let's tweak this little thing, as opposed to like, well, that didn't. Okay. That thing you said with the swing, let's try that. Let's see if that works. Right. So I do think, yeah, I don't know. Maybe they kill more people too, though. It's like, yeah, 10-year-olds should be able to drive, right? It depends. You know what I mean? So, but
So next one, like you have like two people, right? Two kids, with a kids be two people, right? I think some people like they go to like a swimming pool, right? One person will go to the highest diving board and jump in. Other person, like tip the toe in, and like why do some people like be so I won't say scared, but other people like go all in, right?
Well, I think a lot of that phenomenon is learned, right? Like there's I remember being I was watching this little kid, and me and her mom were watching her, and she grabbed this balloon, and then she kind of tripped and she fell on the balloon, like this kind of thing, and I was like, oh, that's awesome, right? The little airbag right there. But the mom was freaked out because when she was little, she'd had a balloon burst on her like that, right? And so like there was an element of not allowing her daughter to have that experience because she'd had a bad experience with that, right? And so, is this related to what I said? What you asked? Yeah, it's like some of the things that we learn, it's not because we learned ourselves. It's because we were scared into learning them. You know what I mean? So, and there's some, my philosophy while raising my kids was to give them enough space to find themselves without getting themselves killed. Right. Like, so there's aspects of like, okay, you can't play with the knives. Right. But give you a lot of space to,
yeah.
Right. And so, there's a lot of ways in which my kids got hurt, but it was because they were like, well, I can't fly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. My kids, obviously they're all grown, but I disagree with this, but when my philosophy growing up, like, like if a kid was in like a swing, right? Hey, dad, push me. I push them as I can, but basically I'll fall out and bust their ass, right? And then you go in there, wipe them off, get back in the swing, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? There's if kids weren't so exposed to what we were afraid of,
yeah,
right? Like they have a fear of going there, going too high or whatever. So who knows why? And then this also gets into, maybe it's not their fear.
Yeah.
Right. There's what was there was a movie that I loved, which was about, it was a researcher who studied eyes, and he found all eyes were like different fingerprints, but they were the eyes are the windows of the soul.
Yeah.
And so the idea was that if you had the exact same iris, that was the same soul born into another body, right? And so so it was an interesting idea. Like there are some people who have irrational fears of something, right? So in this movie, like I'm not saying I believe this. I'm not saying I don't believe this either, right? But in this movie, how this soul died in one of their lives was in an elevator,
okay.
Right? And so when they found this soul again, they were trying to determine, is this the same soul? And they pretty much determined, okay, it's not. So then they were saying, okay, it was like this little kid in India, right? So they were just going to let the kid go back and, be a homeless kid and on the street. It turned out to be, but they tried to get her to go into an elevator and she wouldn't go into an elevator. She was terrified of the elevator, right? So was that her fear? Was that from a past life?
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, it's amazing what people like do and don't do. Like my son, he has never eaten bread in his life.
Never eaten bread
Or hamburger. He's like in his 20s.
Okay.
Never
And
eaten bread or hamburger.
Is that because of you?
No, I love hamburger and bread.
Okay. And he's just never eaten it?
No, never eat.
Wow. Okay.
Like never eaten bread or hamburger. We don't know why. Just like, it was crazy. Like, little kids, I would always like go to the store, buy stuff, buy hamburger. There's a hamburger Jason. Like, are you kidding me right now? Like, how do you know like he doesn't like this, right?
So that's funny, right? Like, where does that come from, right? So I don't know where.
Yeah, all our family likes them, like you just.
I don't know where that stuff comes from.
Yeah.
All of the things come from, and a lot of it is, some of it's learned, maybe some of it's just imprinted. Who knows, right? Maybe there is. We do know that DNA methylation can go several generations, right? Yeah. So maybe that is a way to have the generational memory, right? Yeah. Like there may be a biological basis for that, but maybe it's not yours. Maybe it's not your fear.
Yeah. And then like two of my kids, like, like use like, like you might drink after someone, you have someone, two of my kids, they will only eat or drink after their grandmother. Not me, not the mother. They'll only eat or drink after their grandmother.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So talk about the, something called, I think it's called Seattle Science Cafe.
Yeah.
What is that?
So there's one of the so this is the whole thing where I started off the whole thing about how scientists should be able to speak to the public, right? But part of the reasons that some people are afraid to ask questions because they're going to look like an idiot, right? So this international.
But some people don't need any help looking like an idiot.
That's right, exactly. That's true. But when you're asking questions, right, this goes back to a good idea or a bad idea. Like, what if you could talk to an expert in the field and be able to ask any question at all, like even a stupid question, right? And so that's the idea around the science cafes, and it's an international movement. And in Seattle, I was like, we've got to bring this to Seattle. And I met up with a woman named Gretchen because I wasn't, she was all about creating venues and getting the venues and all that. And so she had that handled. She says, the thing that I can't do is like get people to come talk. And I was like, that's what I love to do. Right. Like I love to invite people to come talk and give these kinds of talks. So we were founders. We founded the Science on Tap, right, which is the Seattle Science Cafe. And and what you do is you bring a scientist in and they talk for 20 minutes, and then the rest of the time, and you've got a beer, right, which helps loosen any inhibitions, right? Exactly. And they so they can ask any question, right? And so so people would be able to, like, somebody come in and talk about physics or like astrophysics or whatever, right? And then people would be able to ask any kind of question they wanted to. And so that's the idea, is that you get 20 minutes and then you just ask questions.
And is it like once a month, once a week, once a month?
Yes, once a month.
And how do someone get invited to this?
To talk, you mean?
Yeah, or just to go in general.
Just to go do it. Yeah, you get on their mailing list. They send you an email and they said the one this month is on this, and you go in and hang out and drink beer and listen to somebody talk about something interesting, and then ask all the questions you want. So,
nice. So this is like a kind of hard question, I think. Why do you think there's so few females in STEM?
Because guys are dicks.
Well, that's true. We can be. I'll admit to that.
So yeah, I'm sorry. That was the bourbon talking.
I mean, and there's stats out there that show like in elementary school, like 80% of females are interested in STEM in elementary school, because it drops down to 10% in high school.
Yeah, it's because it's when you are told that you can't do something because of something you've got no control over, right? It it's at some point, the worst thing about somebody saying so, how they talk about sticks and stones will break my names will never hurt me. It's not true. There's a great joke or moral story, you could say, there's the umpires, right? There's a reporter who's talking to an umpire, and he speaks to a young, how do you do it? How do you do this? And he says, oh, well, I just call them the way they are.
Yeah.
Right. If it's a ball, I call a ball. If it's a strike, I call it a strike. And then there's the umpire that's been doing this for 10 years. He's like, that's not how it happens. He says, if I see a ball, I call it. Right. And if I see a strike, right. Like, so he's acknowledging that there's like, it may not be that entirely. And the veteran umpire is like, he says, it's the way I call it. If I call it a ball, it's a ball.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing that happens with people, right? You know, so when somebody says, you're beautiful, right? It doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter what anybody says, but it's when you look in the mirror and you look at yourself and say, oh yeah, I am beautiful. Yeah. That's the only voice that matters, even though we talk about it like it's what other people say, but it's not. It's because it's what's going on in our own mind. And so if you get told enough that you're stupid or you don't belong, you eventually you have so much evidence piling up that I'm not wanted here, right? Or that somebody thinks that I shouldn't be doing this. You start to believe it, right? And I think that's what happens for girls in science, right? In STEM, is that they get told enough. Right. You know, there's so many stories, and both men and women. Right. You know, one of my best friends in grad school was told that he was an idiot and he shouldn't go into math. Right. And he got his physics degree. Right. You know, so, you know, I think there's no such thing as a bad idea. Right. When you're with a young kid, all of their ideas are great. Right. Even the weird ones, like the little cat they see, or I see dead people, right? You know, my daughter, if she's like, I don't know why you showed us that movie. That movie was terrifying, but I found out years later it's because that was her, right? She didn't know what to do with it either. So, like,
how many times, you have a little girl, don't play in the mud, right? Or don't do it. How many times you tell kids, like parents tell kids, don't jump the mud puddle, but like the mud puddle is like experience from them, right? They learn this stuff.
Not only that, but it's probably good for their immune system as well, right? So. So they're healthier all the way around.
So let's talk about your own business.
Yeah.
So first of all, like for your business, how do you figure out your pricing model, right? I think so many people, they start a business, they like charge way too less, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you make sure like charge the value needed without, without price gouging your customers? Like, how do you come to that balance?
It's so funny because it all depends on how I'm feeling about myself too, right? I was working for somebody, right? And I was like, okay, just go, like, say the biggest thing, right? And I was like, okay, I'm going to ask for $150 an hour, right? And she's like, great, right? And it's like,
you're like, damn, I said for $300.
Exactly, right? And in that moment, right? And so, but then there was like, and then I had to deal with that. That's how much I'm worth. Right. That's how much I'm worth. And the funny thing is, I mean,
$150, that's a lot of money. Then again, it's not a lot.
It's not a lot of money. Right. Especially like the kind of expertise that I bring to things now. And to be straight about it, I haven't upped my rates since I did that. Right. Cause that was like such a freaking breakthrough. Right. But then, and I've had people say, well, I'm willing to pay you $75 an hour. Like, and so, and I can take that or not. Right. But and I'm kind of privileged right now in that I can, I don't have to work. Right. Cause I've found like, I left a salaried position. Right. And then I just took a break. I was like, I don't want to do anything for a while. And that's when I started like reading up on psychedelics and like learning about the whole world and experimenting in that realm. And then I sing for a threshold choir. So I left the Catholic Church and then started singing for Threshold, which is singing for people on the threshold of life. Right. And so there's that whole world of how we are about death. Right. We're awful about death. Right. We don't want to talk about it. Things like that. So, that's one of the things I'm committed to, is just transforming how we relate to death. Right. And so like, I want to do some of that, and I like riding my bike. And so I volunteer while riding my bike, kind of thing. And I realized that how much do I need? Really, like, how much do I need? And I've a lot of time I've based on that, right? I've got I'm consulting on a grant that's in at the NIH, and I said 150 an hour, right? But I'm working on this other project that I love that for just.
But I'll say based on what you need and your value would be two different things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, this other project that I love, and, they don't have a whole lot of money. And so I, charge $50 an hour because I think it's awesome.
I definitely, yeah. I definitely think you have to be at one price. You got to be, like you said, like kind of like a flexible, right?
Yeah. And I've also found in the past, like where I've chased the money, that it never went well, right? It never went well, right? I remember there was one point where I was like, okay, I could either go for a postdoctoral position, or I could go work for this other company, right? And I was like, oh, I'm going to get more money going for the company. So I went to work for them, and it turns out that I was going to be paid way less than I would have been paid as a postdoc, right? And I, ended up being fired from that company because, wasn't that great anyway.
Yeah.
Right. I ended up in neuroscience anyway, right? But it was so there's an element of every time I've chased the money, it hasn't been I love to do, right? And I've found, like, I don't want to work for the weekend, right? I really do. When I take a job, I really want it to be intellectually stimulating and give me, what I need elsewhere as well. Because there's a lot of the value that I provide isn't paid for, right? Like one of the things that I do is I create a really great space, right? So like people can say all sorts of things. I can talk to people and give them, what they need, like to empower them. And that I've never been paid for that, but I've been doing that for 20, 30 years. So
talk about this. Talk about your process, or basically it's like the whole process or journey from going from working somewhere else to deciding to be an entrepreneur, to starting your own company. Like how does that whole thing?
Well, the first time I did it, which was right after I left, so it was about 2004. I was like, I don't know how to do. I don't know how to. I became a freelance science writer, right? And that was kind of cool, right? And so I did some weird jobs, and then I eventually went to work as a program manager, just so that I could get that kind of experience. But and this last time, I applied for several different jobs just to be, employee someplace, and to just continue that whole life, like insurance and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I noticed is that I have insurance, right? Like that whole thing.
You know what? So many people are like scared to do something because of insurance, right?
Exactly, right?
It's a freaking fucking shame.
Isn't it? Right? And I was like, okay,
I'm
that's
say
crazy.
this bullshit 9-to-5 job making $20 an hour, instead of like, I know how to do this great thing for making a millionaire.
Right.
Insurance.
Yeah. Because of insurance. Right. And so, I realized that I had that fear. Right. And so then now I'm just buying my own insurance. That's fine. I'm just going to buy my own insurance. And once I did that, right, because I couldn't find, the other thing is I kept interviewing at places, and, I've been in enough places where the environment was toxic, and I'm like, and
you can usually tell right off, like the interview.
Well, it's sometimes. So there was one place that I worked that it was my dream job. It was amazing. I loved it. And then there was a reorganization, and I got moved into a different department, and I started working for this empire building. She was horrible.
Jackass motherfucker.
Yeah. So she was horrible. Right. And I was like, I was miserable because that was going to be my last job. Right. I loved working there. And then the reason I left is, I went to I was mentoring some kids in science. Right. And there was a VP of HR who was talking, and that's when he said, most managers are awful. They don't know how to manage.
Yeah.
And people don't leave a company, they leave a manager.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment that I realized that I had to leave that company.
So I'll push back that. I don't think people leave companies with bad managers. People leave companies that tolerate bad managers.
Yeah. Right. Well, almost nobody has a great management program. Like, you promote somebody for doing a good job into a management position, but then they don't give them the skills that they need.
I think it's called the Peter principle. Peter principle, yeah. Or like
Yeah.
you're promoted outside your expertise.
Yeah. And so, and so, when I was interviewing, I was looking for positions that I was mostly looking, okay, like, could I do this job? This job is interesting, right? It's intellectually stimulating, all this. And then I just went all in, like, tell me about the company. And you could tell by how they would talk about things. And after, for like, it was interview after interview, I was just like, oh my God, I don't want to work there.
Yeah.
Right. And so then I was like, well, hell, shit, what do I do now? Right. And so then I was like, well, and in the meantime, I was doing stuff like, I started volunteering more for the food bank,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was singing more, and then getting trained to be a hospice volunteer. And I, like, all this time, my mom lives at home and she's getting older. And then, the whole thing about COVID, like supporting my kids, like coming out of that whole hellscape, right? All of that. Like, there's a lot of other things. And I was like, I really like not working 40 hours a week. Like, what if I could work 20 hours a week? And I'm like, wow, I could easily work 20 hours a week and have all the stuff that I want. Right.
Easily,
and do the things that are fulfilling, right? Like, go on this spiritual journey, right?
And one thing I tell people that interview for a job, like, first of all, if you interview for a job, you ask questions, right?
Yeah.
So I tell people, you interview for a job, it's usually like a panel of 3 or 4 people. Ask them, what do you not like about this company?
Oh yeah.
And like, you'd be surprised how honest people are, right?
Well, they talk about it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, because I always ask them. I ask stuff like, what kind of management training you got, right? And so there are some that are like, we're really excited about this. We've got this, and I'm like, oh, okay, right? And so, but mostly, so there's very few companies that I think I would like to work for. I would like to work for MAPS, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the companies that I would like to work for, right?
But again, you never know, right? You might be a toxic company, like,
right?
You never know, right?
You never know.
It might be like,
Actually, I do lunch club dates. Have you ever done those?
No.
It's lunch club. It's just a networking thing. I started doing it when I went remote, because I was like at home, right? And I wanted, I'm an extrovert. And so then I'd get to leave once a week and go have coffee with a total stranger and talk about stuff, right?
Okay.
And the algorithm was pretty good. So I was usually matched up with people who were interesting people, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I've been doing that lately. And there was a reason I was telling you that. But
lunch club dates, meeting people.
Yeah.
MAPS was maybe MAPS is toxic.
Oh,
They never know until you actually work at a place.
Yeah. No, I have no idea why I was saying all that, but I was just talking. I was talking to somebody and they said something. It was so true, and I can't remember what it was. So
no worries.
That's also the bourbon.
Yeah. So, what is like scientific communication?
It's finding a way to communicate a complex subject in such a way that it becomes relevant to you.
Okay.
So, there, quantum loop gravity, right? Like, that's a fascinating topic, right? And it's Ravelli. What's his name? I think it's Marco Ravelli. He wrote a book that makes that accessible. Right. I haven't been able to find anybody who writes about string theory to make it accessible to me right yet. And so being able to, maybe it's using analogy or maybe it's talking about why it's relevant, but you have a conversation that has what it is that you want to talk about be relevant to you. Right? Like, who cares why ants have sex, or if they probably don't, right? But I don't know, right? But who cares about that? But then why is that interesting to you? Like, why is it relevant to you? And so being able to talk about it, right? And and sometimes you just gotta you gotta keep working at it, right? Like, oh, that's not relevant at all. Like, you don't care, I was fascinated by whether or not a protein gets phosphorylated when it gets activated, right? Nobody cares about that. But they are interested in, why is it that some people are more tolerant to drugs? And why is it that some people become addicted to drugs, right? Those particular drugs, like, that's interesting, right? And that's on the big, and sometimes sometimes you have to abstract it out enough that it's, you're not actually asking the exact question that's going to solve that problem, but you're building a network of knowledge or a network of understanding to be able to probe that question, to be able to
I
understand
think that's
it.
a great point. Like a lot of people like want to know, like, let me feel the answer. But the biggest thing is like, are you asking the right question?
Right.
Like, is the question you're asking what you need to answer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and sometimes it's not right, but, but sometimes you have to ask a different question before you can answer that question. And then you're off on a tangent. Right. And so, like we found something interesting here. Right. And we just kept going there and we never answered that question. So it's like, there's something about, following your nose, like following where you get interested, and I think that's kind of why I love science, because, you can just start with something like, dirt's interesting, right? Like I like dirt, right? And then you could start.
I mean, if you're a farmer, you better be damn interested in dirt.
Exactly, right? But then you can do all sorts of things like what can I grow in this dirt, right? Or
the dirt in India is different in North America versus from this and place, like this dirt grows this dirt grows that, you know.
And this, like, there's living stuff in this dirt. I didn't know so much stuff could live in this dirt, right? Like how far down before things aren't living in the dirt, right?
Yeah, you could put you dig it in your front yard, like there's like worms, moles, like
right. There's all sorts of stuff, right? And so if you just and you can see the tangents, right? You can follow any of those. So I love letting people explore that, right? I love it when people are curious, right?
Let's suppose someone's out there. They could be 8 years old, 45 years old, whatever age, right? And they're like, you know what? And they have let's say you have a high school diploma, right? Or let me backtrack. You can't have hopefully you maybe have a high school diploma at 8, right?
Yeah.
Or when you're age, right? You're curious, right? Like, you know what? I want to be a scientist. What advice you have for them?
Do it.
Do it.
And here's the other thing. It's you already are a scientist. You don't have any credentials. There's a way to science. Right. But if you are curious enough to say, I want to be a scientist, then you already are. Okay. Right. You're science minded, you're curious, go for it. Just, start experimenting. Right. Like there are technicalities that you need to know. Right. Like, you need to know how to reproduce an experiment. Right. Like, because otherwise you don't really know for sure what happened. Right. And mostly because of entropy and all of the initial conditions, we don't know what's happened anyway, but you can try and control it enough to be able to ask the right kind of question, to be able to answer the thing that you're looking for, but not when you get into complex systems. So it's, wow, there I go. Tangent again.
What does it mean to be peer reviewed?
So you write a paper and you have an idea and you think that you've come to a conclusion about something. And you've done a whole bunch of experiments. And so you write it all up. So, and you just write up the pertinent ones. And then you take that document and you give it to other scientists to look at. And so
does it matter the level of the scientist? Like, does it matter the scientist, like 1-year scientist, 25-year scientist?
People would probably say, that matters. The peer review process is kind of interesting. It's a job that scientists do that they don't get paid for, right? The public funds.
So it's like the good of the scientific community.
Exactly. It really is, and then sometimes, so the idea is ideally you wouldn't know who the authors are, right? Okay. You would just look at the science and look at the conclusions they came to. And hopefully you would have enough, like there's some people who have enough experience to know, okay, you can't do that experiment and get the right results unless you have the right buffer.
And it can be scientists in the United States, India, China, Russia.
Right. Okay. Right. Well, yeah, but mostly, I've never been an editor but so one of the jobs of an editor is to find people who'd be willing to read other people's papers and then to comment on them. And unfortunately,
I'm guessing these papers, it's not like a one page, it's like a summary. It's like these, like,
oh yeah. Full
big
documents.
Documents,
yeah, with all the experiments and sometimes supplementary information, and depending on the level of the journal, right? You've got to.
So it's not a 1-hour job.
No.
You're dedicating some good amount of time.
Yeah, there's a lot of time to look at, and then also, so you may be able to see right away that this is problematic. Like you shouldn't do you shouldn't do this kind of an experiment to get the answer here, or you shouldn't have done this kind of statistics to determine if something actually happened. That's when I moved from physics into biology, right? There was one of my best friends in grad school. He was also a physicist. And then we moved into biology, and our advisor was talking about, she says, so in biology, you've got something like this, so it's like 50% chance that there's something happening, and then you change it, and maybe there's a 30%. And I was like, how do you know anything ever happened? Because in physics, it's like yes or no, it's like 99.9%, right? And he was like annoyed, right? Because it's like, so it's like sometimes you have to do, because the systems are so noisy, right? Ecosystems are crazy noisy, right? You do statistics to see, like, is this a statistically significant result that we found? And so, sometimes the statistics are wrong. Maybe the experiment was fine, or maybe there was something missing in the experiment, or maybe they missed a control, right? Like, you should also measure this. That's one of the things that cracks me up about psychedelics, right? Is that, in all drug studies, you have to have a placebo control, right? Which means that they're not getting the drug, but they don't know whether or not they're getting the drug, except that if you're on a psychedelic, you almost always know that you got the drug, right?
Yeah,
so,
and you don't get it, you probably know too,
exactly.
Unless you never had it, I guess.
Well, no, it's not well, yeah, maybe, right? They talk about, I was talking to somebody about it. He says, no, you have to have a placebo control. And I was like, well, how are you going to do that with a psychedelic, right? There's this joke, right, where you've got all these people sitting around on a sectional, right, and they're looking at the group in the center. There's like 5 of them in the center, and they're all naked and they're dancing and they're holding hands. They're like, well, I guess we know who got the placebo. Right. So,
yeah, that's funny.
So yeah, so there's, and it's funny too. Like back, there was when they were doing vaccines, right? Doing vaccines. One of the questions that anti-vaxxers would say is, well, did they control this study? Right. Like and in some of the cases, like you would never, if you were a parent taking your kids in for vaccines, you would never withhold the vaccine from them, because that's what we're doing, right? Where you're coming for a vaccine, right? And I guess with trials, it's different. Like they actually, but a lot of the questions that would be asked of around vaccination is like, well, did you do the controls? Have they been doing the controls? And you're like, we don't do that, right? Like some of those experiments, you just don't do controls, right? Because it would be ethically wrong to withhold the drug, withhold the treatment, withhold the medication, right? So
earlier you talked about like doing experiments on mouses, right? So brain experiments. So like, is there really a difference, like the mouse brains, monkey brains, human brains? Are they is the brain a brain to a certain extent?
Well, there was an exercise we did at the Allen Institute, right, where we actually took a picture of a neuron, right, and the idea was for you to be able to tell, is this in a mouse brain or is this in a human brain? Now that we took the scale bars off because there is a difference in size, right? But there are enough similarities, right, that you could, like a liver cell, sometimes it's hard to tell, where did this come from, right? So is this from a human or is it from a mouse, right? So so in that aspect, right, when you get down, if you reduce it all the way down, like there are genetic differences as well. Like for some reason, in the phylogenetic tree, that this receptor in rats always uses this amino acid versus in humans always uses this one, right? So there are differences down at that level. But so there, depending on at what level you're looking at, there are definitely differences, and there are things that are incomplete. Like we have models for Alzheimer's in mice, but we don't fully understand Alzheimer's in humans. So we've got some of the markers of what we think is Alzheimer's in humans in mice, and we call that an Alzheimer's model. You know what I mean? So it's like there's a lot of ways in which the extrapolation we extrapolate, but we don't know for sure if it's an accurate model of what it is that we're looking at.
Yeah. So for your own company, what actually does your company do? Well, let me backtrack. So for your own company that you have, are you a consultant, or do you have your own company? Or
I'm a consultant. Yeah. And I've got my own
so
LLC.
LLC.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you talk about like how you started this journey?
Yeah.
And then like where you're focusing now, what you see your future plans are?
Yeah. So I worked for a startup company that was the graph database, and it's a extraordinary platform. And when I started working there, it was mostly customized, so based on the clients that we were working with and what they wanted. But what we really wanted was a product that we could just ship, right? And then people would use the product and the different features. So I worked with our clients. So depending on, their academics and industry and government. So we worked across all the different kinds of industries. Mostly what they had in common is they had a mapping their ecosystem. And so I did a lot of working with the clientele to understand their problem and to see how we could help them. And then sending that information back to the dev team. It was a startup. And so the runway got really short. And so the company downsized to work solely on the project. And I was doing a lot of the consulting stuff. And so the consulting like stuff. So I still use that platform, right? And I work with people who have complex problems. So they will refer people to me to work with them. So and I also work with people who just have a complex problem that they're trying to understand or innovate around. So that's how it started, right? And I find that I like that. Like I like being able to work with people who are. And when I say a complex problem, I don't mean like, a complicated problem is going to the moon, right? But there's it's specific. It's like you can do that. You can do that with just notebooks, right? And looking at charts, right? But a complex problem is like, how do we have people live on the moon? Like, what is that going to take to have a viable colony on the moon? That's a complex problem, right? And most of the complexity is going to be in the relationships, right? And so that's why a graph database, right? And so it's being able to, so I like working with somebody to be able to map out their ecosystem. And especially in business, if you have a couple people working in the business, they'll have an idea of what their system looks like, right? But they don't know that their own personal models are distinct from each other until you put it into a boundary object, like I said earlier, right? A way to be able to look at it and see, oh, okay, I didn't relate to our model, like this thing is connected to this thing. And then it goes on to do this thing, right? I actually was thinking more from like the production point of view, right? Like they have a different point of view and you can actually have them align their models. So I like working those kinds of complex circumstances in those cases to to visualize it and to make it simpler and to be able to show them things that were hidden beforehand, just to streamline the whole process and make it easier to either innovate or just to use the resources that they have or just to keep track of shit. So
who is your perfect customer and how do you find them?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. So the perfect customer is somebody who is, they have a problem, they have a situation, they have something that they're working on, and they realize that it's way more complex than they thought. And they're interested in finding a way to understand the problem, right? And to being willing to look at different avenues, and somebody who understands like a lot of people do in databases, right? Rows and columns, like they understand most things don't happen in rows and columns. That just happened to be an easy way for us to be able to map it out to understand it. People understand that we need to go beyond rows and columns to be able to map out something that's pretty complex. Also, somebody who is in a position we call them facilitators. So they're not people who keep minutes in meetings, but somebody who like sees the big picture and realizes that if this person and this person were talking about the right kind of thing, that would be magic. Right. And so, but it's, and they're often the people that are overlooked, right? Like they're the ones that like the glue that keep the company together. Right. But, they're often the first people to get fired. And then later when they go back and they're like, wow, I guess that person did do a lot. It didn't look like they were doing a lot here. They just, they talk to a lot of different people and all this kind of stuff. They're usually the ones that are not acknowledged, or it's the person who understands that kind of complexity and being able to get people in the right positions. So those are my perfect customers.
So funny story for you, like, so I was in the Army, officer Army. I was facing a career, right, in 2ID, right? And so I'd been like 2 or 3 months, right? This one guy, he was like a PSC at the time, right? And I always walk by his desk. He was like, he had a computer screen, right? But he would never do nothing. He just looked at the computer screen, right? So one day I called like with 3 people below me, like, hey, what's going on with this guy, right? Like he does nothing, right? We got to get rid of him. And all said at the same time, sir, if we get rid of him, we'll all get fired. Understood. Let's get this guy promoted in, right?
Right.
I had no clue what he did, right?
Yeah.
I know what he's supposed to do, but he's like doing stuff like, oh, he's doing all this stuff, right? I had no idea what he did, right? It's my people told me.
Yeah. So yeah, it's so I like working with those people that are like the hubs of all of it, who have their hands in a lot of different things and understand what's having the thing work. Because also if they're in that position and they understand it, right, they're committed to something. They're committed to moving the needle in some aspect. And I love working with people like that. I love working with people who are committed to making a difference. Like they really do. They really are interested. Making money is fine, right? But it's like the least exciting
until they bring
thing.
in the UBI, you got to make some money, right?
Right. So
or hit the lottery.
Yeah, right, exactly. But
or have rich uncle.
but having that be like, I like doing this thing and it happens to make me a lot of money, right? Versus, like I'm doing this to make enough money, right? I'm doing, like that's, I find that's the least interesting.
People say, you want to make $100,000 a year, but work 8 hours a week, or you want to make 50,000 and do it how you want to,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. Right. I'm lucky enough that I could ask, I could do that. Like, I don't have to make I'm not in like survival mode. Right. There's an element, I'm old enough that I have very few fucks left to give, right? So I'm very spare with the fucks that I hand out.
That's one thing I wish like most people like learn earlier, especially me, like the earlier you learn not to give a fuck, the
exactly.
Right.
Waiting for watching my kids, especially when they were like 18-ish, right?
Yeah.
All the fucks they give, man.
Oh, why do I have dress? Why this, that, right. And people think all the time, like, oh, they care what I drive, what I wear.
Yeah. Or
no one cares.
I can't say that to people.
Yeah.
Right. So
what do you like about science? What do you not like about science?
I'm going to start with what I don't like first. Right. And I don't like the structures that we have. Right. I really liked working at the Allen Institute. Right. Because there was this billionaire who had an interest in the brain. And he was going to do something. He was like that nobody had ever done before, and he actually he did the same thing as the NIH did, right? Only what was different is he had all of this computing power. He put all of this web app development on top of the data, so that you could actually query the data itself to understand how the brain was working. I loved what he did with his money, and I was like, it reminded me of back in the like in the old times where the Medicis would they would have a lot of the scientists would have a patron, right? So I don't like the system in which science has to be done these days, like how it I think it stifles creativity and innovation, right? And because there's just not and that there's definitely a survival atmosphere, a scarcity atmosphere. Like there's not enough money to go around for people to have ideas that aren't going to pan out, right? But that's what science is, right? And so, the thing I love about it is just it's a way to understand your world, right? And the more, I was pretty clear when I first started that it was the way to understand your world, and it's not, right? It's a way, it's a filter that you can understand your world, and it's fun, right? There's so many things that you can do with science that are just a blast. Like TikTok was awesome for that, right? Because you can start to see some of the experiments that people are doing that are just awesome.
The stuff with TikTok, it gets a lot crazy, but stuff people do with TikTok is amazing.
I know, it's awesome, right? I appreciate those creators. And I think that Mark Zuckerberg is damn right. He wants to get TikTok shut down
He needs
because,
to be scared.
yeah, no, he wants to get TikTok shut down because that, it's gonna ruin Facebook, right? Which wouldn't be a bad thing. So
what do you do to take care of yourself?
I walk. I have animals around. I have cats and dog and chickens. I meditate. I meditate every day. I sing. I volunteer. I deliver groceries for the food bank, right? On my bike, right? It's like, so I get to exercise as well as do that. I did this thing called the Artist's Way, right? I'll take myself on a date, right? Just to decompress, right? So I do shamanic journeys, right? I let my imagination go run free and visit other worlds, right? So and I do a lot of the work. So one of the things about doing psychedelics especially as a way to expand your consciousness, right, is there are lessons that you learn in there, right? The first time when I had the really disappointing journey, right, and then I felt pity for myself, and then I saw myself just like go hard on that, like how hard I was on myself, right? Like that I would even pity myself, right? Like there's a lot of integration work to be done, like the lessons to be learned, right? Like if the basic message is love, right, and you don't love yourself, go to work on that, right? Because there's nothing there for you not to love, right? There's nothing wrong with you. There's, a lot of people feel like they understand themselves better than anybody else, right? And so they think that they're right when they're picking on the thing that's wrong with themselves. So, there's a lot of integration work that I'm doing, right? Like the taking apart all of the assumptions that I have in the world. So there's a lot of introspective work on that one, a lot of journaling. I like to write. So I do a lot of that work that way, like sorting stuff out like that. So
what's something that you do that you want to get better at?
Blogging. Yeah. I used to blog just because I fucking loved it, right? Like, I was sitting down and they were pulling down a tree from in front of the school across the street, and I had the thought, like, do trees feel pain? And then I went, I looked it up, and I was like, found all this stuff, and I wrote it up really quick, and I didn't care about how accurate it was or anything. I posted it, right? It was awesome, right? And I did a lot of that. And then it's, they're like, I started caring about, who was reading and if people were reading it, and then, I had to be like more accurate. And then, and then people would say things like, no, you need to be like more rigorous. And I'm like, no, it's just banter. Right. So I want to go back to being carefree about it. Right. As opposed to doing it right or doing it.
You got 3 kids, right?
I do.
All of them out of the house now, high school age, college age? 2
of them are out of the house. One of them is still at home.
Okay. So how do you do this? How do you make sure like you didn't influence them? Like, how put this? Like, how as a parent do you make sure like you don't influence them to like follow your path? Like not person because freedom at the same to do that. If that question makes any sense.
Well, that's like they're that whole thing that I said about give them enough space to find themselves without getting themselves killed. right? My kids all shared with me when they started doing drugs, right? They shared with me when they started having sex, right? Because we provided a space for them to know no matter, right? And so they do know that, right? And they've told us now that they've told us several times that they appreciated how we are. So, but, and I check in, and sometimes I get worried, right? Like I said, COVID did some horrible things for mental health, right? And, all of my kids struggled, right? They all dealt with a whole bunch of stuff, but they talked to us about it, right? And then, Scott and I work stuff. My husband is Scott. Scott and I work stuff out in front of them, right? So that they know that there's there's this whole thing, my mother-in-law was coming into town, and I'm like, do I take my flipping off uterus off, that flag? And I was like, right, I'm just going to leave it, and we'll have whatever conversations that come up. But, they were around for that. So they know that, we struggle with stuff, and, we talk to them about stuff, and they think we're way too affectionate, which makes me happy. So.
So you consider yourself a socialist, right?
Yeah.
What does that even mean? Like, what does that mean? What's the definition of that?
There is a definition.
What's your definition?
Yeah,
What's the
for me,
society definition?
For me, is like I just want people to be taken care of, and I think that socialists care more about people than any other political party, right? And they care less about money and more about people. And I think for those who care more about money than they do about people, right? Like if for some people are a way to get money, right? That's, I can definitely see why they don't like socialism, because, right? I'm fine with spending money. That's what we created it for, is to spend it. We didn't create it to hoard it. It's a fucking conversation, right? So spend it.
That's so funny. So do you think socialism is different in different countries, or socialism is socialism?
Well, I think different countries will. Do I think socialism is socialism?
That people always say, like social United States will say, well, it might have failed in Cuba or whatever country, but
right.
we haven't done it here yet.
Yeah, which is BS, right? I think different again, it's all interpretation, right? Different different countries interpret it differently. And so that's what they see what they're doing as socialist or not socialist, right? We look at the powers that be here, like to think that we're not socialist. But I think the fact
every time a bank fails, we're a socialist country.
Exactly, right. Anytime one of the big one of the cronies fails, that we bail them out. But it used to be that we we paid for the roads and we paid for education. In New Mexico, actually, they've got any kid can actually go to school for free. And part of why they did that is because they were 49th in education, right? They were worse than the South, right? And so they started putting money into education, which some countries are like, well, yeah, of course, like that doesn't even figure into their socialist, the universal healthcare for some countries. Well, like, of course, like healthcare is like, my dad said this great thing. He said the difference between the United States and Canada is that in Canada, owning a gun is a right.
Yeah, it's very, very, very serious.
Yeah. So
I know a lot of people say, like, I'm making this up. So like the people complain, like criticize, like I will say Sweden, right? Sweden is a socialist company or whatever. There's no entrepreneurship, but based on all the KPIs, Sweden is way more of an entrepreneurial country than the United States is.
Yeah. Even
though they're quote unquote socialist.
Right. And that's because they don't have to worry about the basics. They don't have to worry about healthcare, right? They can say, screw it, man. And like, it's damaging, right? The fact that when people lost their jobs, they lost their insurance, and then they caught COVID and they were fucked.
Yeah.
right? So, the countries that don't have to, they're not worried about their healthcare. They can be more innovative than we can.
Yeah. I would push back a little bit. So I'm retired from the Army, right? If we have like free Medicare,
Yeah.
it's basically socialized medicine. And like, man, you might not, right? Because like it takes like 1 to 2 months to get an appointment, Now, don't get me wrong, like I've had a soldier surgery, it's free now, but man,
Yeah.
it took me like a year to get to that point, right?
Okay. So that's not socialized, right? Like that is, and look at how people want to take that away, right? It is the basic fucking minimum that you deserve, right? It literally is the basic minimum, and it's not enough.
Yeah.
Right. The fact that they talk about 22 vets a day committing suicide that's low. That number, it's way higher than that. Right. But, Beto O'Rourke was sharing at that veterans conference that I was at, how they were at the VA, and all of these Vietnam vets were upset. It was like a town hall or something. They're upset about not being able to get an appointment for their mental well-being. Yeah. And the younger vets that had just come back from Afghanistan were like, fuck, if they can't get what they need, there's no way I'm going to get what I need. And right. And one of the kids that came back from that committed suicide the next day. Right. So it's not socialized medicine, right? Okay. It is the bare fucking minimum. Right. My mom pays extra so that she's got enough insurance that Medicare will cover it. Right. And so, in other countries, when other countries complain about their basic medical care, it's ridiculous, right? Because it's like, people in the United States pay way more for shittier healthcare than they get in other countries. So look at the and there's different things, like I grew up in London, Ontario, right? They had one heart hospital. Right. They had, and anybody had heart problems, they all went to that hospital, right? They weren't competing with each other, because it wasn't, the whole idea of having everything be for profit, it just doesn't work, because if everybody has an MRI, then everybody has to pay for their MRI. Right. And then, but what if you only have, 1 or 2 hospitals that have MRIs? Then you can send everybody over there. Right. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And does MRI really cost $10,000?
No, but to pay for the machine, they have to cover it somehow. Yeah. Right. So, if the machine was already paid for, right. So, and if you've got 4 machines in the building, that's true. Right. And every hospital has 4 machines. And so they have to like compete for your dollars so they can pay for their fucking machines. Right?
Yeah. And you have the doctors, like, they have this tremendous amount of debt come out of doctor school. Like, we say it's $300,000, right? Are they going to go like be a plastic surgeon, really help no one, or going to go to a rural hospital, right? Mm-hmm. They have to make the money back, right?
Yeah. Right. And which is why, there's, social programs for debt forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, and what if going to medical school, like, you got paid $400,000, that's a lot of money, right? Nobody needs, a lot more than that. You'd be surprised, though. Apparently like $25 million is like it's interesting just how skewed my kids are when they hear about the kinds of salaries that people, when I was little, my mom asked me how much money I wanted to make. And I said, I was going to make $100,000 a year. And she laughed, right? Like, nobody makes that much money now. Right. But I remember thinking that, right. That the $100,000 wasn't that much.
Yeah.
Right?
Back to that thing I saw AOC, like some show. And of course, I'm assuming she knows what to talk about, but she said that 80% of Americans make $60,000 less. Mm-hmm. And another thing, like, there's another show, it's actually these females, right? Like trying to get a husband, like how tall you want your husband to be? I'll only date someone 6 foot when I'm tall. Well, only 2% of the population is 6 foot tall.
Yeah.
Well, how much you want to make? Oh, 200,000. Only 1% make $200,000 or more, right?
Exactly.
I mean, most people like 5'8" or below and make like $50,000 a year.
Right. So it's it's an interesting thing, though, like what the ideal, our standards and ideals.
Ideal that's fantasy land.
Yeah. And, being able to take a look at those and take those apart every once in a while is a good practice. It's a good mental practice to be able to look at your assumptions.
It is. Terri, is there anything else I asked you that I didn't, or anything else you want to talk about?
No, no, we talked about so many things. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks. So before we get out of here, can you give us any advice on anything you want to talk about?
Yeah. And I said it earlier, right? Anything that you tell your brain to do, it will do it, right? Anything. So if you want to learn something new, and just try it out, try it as an experiment, right? You're going to, give yourself a year to learn something, right? And if you just keep practicing at it just once a week, like you said, you will be way far beyond what you thought, and anything. And I mean that about anything, practice anything. So
last question. How do you make sure your brain tells you positive things to do versus telling you negative things to do?
You got to notice, right? I think I say meditate, because you'll all of a sudden you'll start to hear things that you'd never heard before. Like I heard myself say, somebody asked me something, and the thought I had was, "What, you think I'm stupid?" And I was like, "Whoa!" Like I'd never heard that before, but I heard it, and then I was like, "Do I do that a lot?" And then I realized I did it all the time. Like nobody could say shit to me because who I was, "What, you think I'm stupid?" Right. And in fact, this last little story, right? I was writing my very first grant, right? And my advisor said, write 16 pages and we'll cut it down to 3. And I was like, oh, that's dumb. I don't want to write 16 pages. Right. So finally, it's like the grant's due on Tuesday and I've got like 4 pages. Right. And I took it to my advisor and I said, this is right. He says 16 pages. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. Just tell me what I'm missing. He says, well, I need to see this. And I said, it's in there. And he goes, where? And I said, right here. And he goes, oh, okay, it needs to be there. And I said, okay. And I said, what else? Right. And he says, where is it? And I was, okay, it's not in there. He says, but it needs to be in there. And I said, okay. Right. And we did this for like 30 minutes, right? Just back and forth. And then I went home and I wrote there's three sections to it. Right. The first section, I turned that in. Or the second section, turn that in. The third section. And he called me that Sunday, right? The grant's due on Tuesday. He calls me on Sunday. He goes, where did this document come from? And I said, you told me what to write. And he goes, he said, I had the conversation like I had with you 3 times in my life. And the other 2 times, not only did they never come back to the lab, but they never came back to science. And I was like, oh, okay, well, it's because I'd already dealt with my conversation that I'm stupid. I don't think I'm stupid anymore. So everything you said to me, I didn't take it personally, right? I really was asking, what do you want me to write in here? What do you think would get me funded? And he told me exactly what, and I wrote exactly what he said. I didn't take any of it personally. And I was in the top 11% and I got funded my first grant. Nice. So.
What kind of award do you think this would be? Like, of course, there's some people that have no filters, right? What do they think? They just say it. What if no one had a filter, right? Like, someone asked you, what do you think of my suit? That shit is ugly as hell, right? Yeah, what if no one had a filter?
Well,
like whatever came in mind, you just thought and said it.
So, but on the other side, what if what if sometimes people say things, right? We call them crazy, right? But what if you also didn't take things personally?
Yeah.
Like, what if you were curious when somebody says that, like, that's really stupid. Well, why do you think that's stupid? Right. Not taking it personally, like, oh my God, he thinks I'm stupid. Right. And then like withdrawing or doing whatever it is. But what if you could like, why is that stupid? Right. Because if you're really like asking somebody's opinion and they say it's stupid, well, why do you say it's stupid? Right. Because
or maybe this dress is ugly.
Maybe it is, right. Like I shouldn't have worn this dress out in public. Right. And I actually had that thought because I could see the lines and all this, but why? So, but what if we just didn't take things personally? What if there wasn't?
Point.
Yeah. So.
All right. Last time.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to talk about?
No. Thank you.
Terri, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it.
As a reminder, check out the Cabinet HR crowdfunding campaign at www.refunder.com/CabinetHR. Thanks for your time and remember to be great every day. Stop all this stuff.
Whoa.